The story begins in the midst of a ball. The violinists were playing a familiar melody, and the ladies were gossiping about the outfits of those around them. But the main star of the evening was Duke Kayin of Wintel himself. As soon as he stepped into the audience, he was immediately surrounded. He was amazing. Every girl dreamed of getting at least a little of his attention. Suddenly, the audience noticed a girl who brazenly approached the Duke and began to speak. The girls and boys looked at her with disapproval. They wondered what family she might be from to wear such an old-fashioned dress to a National Foundation banquet. Kayin fixed his gaze on the sweet girl and couldn't tear his eyes away. She was wearing a soft pink dress with lace and embroidered roses. The girl immediately leaned over slightly and introduced herself. Her name was Etisha Hines, from Viscounty Hines. She turned to his lordship and said that he probably hadn't heard of them, since they were half Westerners. The man thought for a moment. Kayin of Windle said he knew this young lady Hines. The Duke asked what she wanted to discuss with him, but the girl only lowered her eyes in response. Lady Hines apologized and asked if they could talk on the balcony. The crowd of people looked at them in surprise and sighed with displeasure. The girl explained that this was simply not something worth talking about here. They both stood guard near the Duke's family's luxurious garden. Etisha Hines stood there, unsure how to start the conversation. She was afraid she'd be rejected. They stood there for so long until her lips began to tremble and tears began to flow from her eyes. Unexpectedly for the Duke, the girl said that she might die soon. An awkward silence fell between them, the only sounds being the sound of crickets and the muted music of the ball. The girl looked up and was surprised at the Duke's imperturbable face. Etisha asked, "Does your lordship have a mistress?" She thought he might detain her because he suspected her of ulterior motives. But she has no other choice. The girl said she knows your highness has a secret child. The guy was shocked by her words and with fear in his eyes told her to continue. She apologized and said that she knew it was unexpected, but she had to finish it before her sister arrived. The lady turned away and asked, "Does your ladyship require a false bride?" "A bride who will fill the empty space." The man considered her words. Etisha Hines, after some hesitation, said decisively that she could fill it. "Like air that disappears as soon as the time comes, for your lordship and his secret mistress." The girl continued that he needed someone who wouldn't cause problems. She would live as if she didn't exist, and then quietly leave. After her death, no one will pressure him to marry another girl. Kayin of Wintel looked at her indignantly and asked why he should listen to her. He doesn't enjoy playing with people's lives. The man turned around and was about to leave for the ball, but then the girl asked him, "Have your lordship heard rumors that the Duke treasures his secret mistress?" Lady Hines added that even if you marry a duke, you'll only receive the title of duchess, not wife. All the ladies in the capital know this. The girl screamed, "Isn't this the same as playing with people's lives?" The Duke turned around and said that these are aristocratic marriages. Etisha replied that she knew, and that was why she was offering it to him. "She'll die soon anyway." The girl drooped and looked at the floor. The lady said that your ladyship did not need to waste her nerves on her. All he needs to do is marry her before he dies, even if it's only for a year. From her father, stepmother, and older sister, she wants to escape from the Hines family. She wants to spend the rest of her life in comfort, not in a family where everyone hates her. Etisha Hines bent low and began to beg the Duke to take her as his wife. "Take her with you to the north." Kayin thought about her words. The man asked, "Is it true that she is terminally ill?" The girl confirmed and said that she was in the 3rd stage of the disease. She still stood there, leaning toward the Duke. Kayin of Wintel considered his decision. Etisha Hines thought that perhaps he found it strange that a girl he didn't even know would suddenly ask him to do such a thing. She closed her eyes and confirmed that she did not regret anything. Unexpectedly, the Duke called her name. The girl raised her head slightly. The man said she was right. His family was pressuring him to get married. But he would never want a wife for himself, and therefore, he paused briefly. Kayin didn't think her proposal was bad. The girl looked up at him in surprise. The guy continued that feelings are of no use in a contractual marriage agreed upon by both parties. Tears came to Etisha's eyes. She couldn't believe he'd agreed. The Duke took a ring from his pocket and asked her to give him her hand. She raised her hand, and the man placed a diamond ring on her ring finger. It sparkled in the moonlight and was so beautiful that the girl could not take her eyes off it. The girl thought it was a ring bearing the Duke of Wintel's insignia. It fitted perfectly to her. She thanked his lordship for such a wonderful gift and for agreeing to the contract. Etisha Hines will make sure that he does not regret their marriage. The night after the ball at the Hines estate, another quarrel occurred. Atisha Hines decided to tell her family she was sick, but the courage to approach them proved too difficult. The girl was already afraid to start the conversation first, so her stepmother, Madame Dorothea, immediately interrupted her. The woman said that she was busy, and if it was not important, then let her sort it out herself. Atisha said that a doctor diagnosed her with the condition a few days ago. She has hypermania syndrome. Tears streamed from the girl's eyes. Her half-sister, Larian Hines, asked what kind of illness it was. Lady Hines replied that it was incurable. The stepmother asked, "Are you talking about the disease where mana accumulates inside the body, and in the case of a woman, her body explodes?" Atisha replied that it was. The doctor told her she was already in stage 3 and had only a year to live. The girl burst into tears. What should she do about it now? Suddenly, Madame Dorothea shouted that she must make every effort on her 20th birthday. The girl looked up at her questioningly. Her father also joined the conversation. The man said he was very scared because they didn't know when Atisha would explode. Suddenly, her stepsister jumped up and said it was creepy and that she shouldn't leave the room. What if it exploded right in front of her? The stepmother added that Atisha was calling them all for all sorts of trivial matters. Everyone in the family agreed and stood up to go to their rooms. They closed the doors to the hall, and Atisha was left standing completely alone in the semi-dark room. She couldn't believe how everyone reacted to the news of her death, even her own father. Atisha always thought she was the weird one. A man holding a pointer shouted at her, "Is it really the same today? Looks like you need to be taught a lesson so you understand." Because she was slow, she couldn't understand. In a flashback, Larian yells at little Atisha to do what she told her. Atisha Hines always thought it was her own fault for not receiving love. The stepmother told Atisha to wear her stepsister's dress. Since she has light brown hair, there is no point in wearing a new dress. However, all this was not because of her, her father, stepmother, and Larian. They just don't love her. The girl realized she had no family. Because Atisha revealed her illness, she is now not allowed to leave the mansion. Suddenly, the girl overheard a conversation between the maids. They were talking about the Duke and how he was looking for a wife. Another maid asked if they were talking about the Duke of the North, Cayenne of Wintel. One of them sighed in amazement and asked, "What about the Duchess?" She replied that, according to rumors, Duke Wintel had a loving mistress. Atisha thought about it and told herself that if death was the same everywhere, then she would like to leave the Hines family. She remembered that evening on the veranda with the Duke. She promised him he would never regret it. Atisha asked him to announce the wedding as soon as possible while the National Foundation banquet was still going on. Cayenne of Wintel asked, "Do you mean to say that you wish to go north as soon as the banquet is over?" The girl looked down and replied, "Yes, if it's possible. Or can't you do that? In fact, it is customary for nobles equal to dukes to first announce their engagement and only then their wedding. If the Duke suddenly announced the wedding, it would be the perfect opportunity to create a scandal about an accidental marriage." Atisha is not afraid of losing her honor, but the honor of Duke Cayenne. The lady said that if it was too sudden, he could announce the engagement first, and he should explain the whole situation to his mistress first. Suddenly, the Duke took her hand in his and said that this was the Wintel family ring. He will do whatever she wants. Duchess Wintel. The girl couldn't believe her ears. The guy asked her if she understood what he told her. The girl looked at him with sparkling eyes and spoke of how grateful she was to him. She had heard that the Duke of the North was known as a ruthless and cruel war hero, and they also say that he has a terrible and cold character. The girl examined him carefully. He is so kind to her, or is it just a sham for the one who will become the temporary duchess? Perhaps it's all just pity, although in fact, that wasn't the point at all. It doesn't matter whether it's politeness towards his fake wife or pity. She's not interested. Atisha said that then, she would like to announce it on the last day of the banquet. In the hall, the guests were still enjoying the evening. Some were dancing, others were gossiping. But then the doors opened and Lady Hines entered the room. Every eye was fixed on her. The girls and men whispered, wondering what she'd talked about with the Duke, perhaps about marriage. And the others immediately dismissed this theory. It was impossible. The first daughter might be able to, but the second, not so. On the first day of the banquet, the ladies discussed why the first daughter of the Hines family was late. But then the palace doors swung open, and she appeared. Lady Hines! She looked simply divine. All the eyes of the boys and girls were focused on her. Larian walked, and with her graceful gait, she made men look at her with their mouths open and girls envy. Suddenly, the girl shouted her sister's name throughout the hall. She came up to me and asked how she could have taken my invitation to the banquet. It was because of her that she was late. It's only the first day. What is she going to do about it? Atisha replied that she had come with an invitation with their last name written on it. She hadn't accepted it. Larianne Heinz came very close to her and said loudly that everything that belongs to the Heinz family is hers. She squeezed her sister's hands tightly, causing her to start crying and screaming for her to let go. Larianne Heinz quietly said to her, "Atisha, you are also a Heinz, therefore you are mine. Didn't I tell you not to leave your room? Why did you, who never showed any interest in such banquets, come here?" She clutched her head tightly, and Atisha could barely hold back her tears. Larianne continued to say that she bought her a toy every day to keep her entertained, and even sang songs to her, all because she didn't give her a doll? Atisha recalled a moment from her childhood. Larianne told her to look in the mirror. She dressed her up and asked her if she thought it was pretty cute. The girl couldn't take her eyes off herself. Atisha confirmed and asked if she could show it to her mom and dad. Larianne rudely asked why. A pleased Atisha replied, "Because you made me beautiful. It wouldn't be so nice if," before she could finish speaking, she heard the sound of sharp scissors snapping in her sister's hands. Her beautiful locks of hair now lay scattered on the floor. Larianne, standing with scissors in her hands, asked if she still wanted to appear to others. Atisha, with tears in her eyes, asked her not to say such a thing. Larianne Heinz came very close to her and smiling said, "You are my doll." The newspapers were filled with headlines about one of the Heinz family sisters. Heinz burned the Countess's tea table. By tearing up the painting, Larianne Heinz destroyed another of the Crown Prince's possessions. Larianne is a bad person. Atisha didn't even know to what extent. If Larianne likes something, she gets it. Always. If she didn't like something, she'd tear it apart. At first, everyone criticized Larianne for her actions. But then, the girls laughed and said that this was Miss Larianne. This was part of her repertoire. They couldn't wait to see what Miss Larianne would do next. Larianne gets love no matter what she does. She is so beautiful, but she makes Atisha sicker than anyone else. Larianne leaned over and quietly told Atisha that she was her doll, only hers. So, the girl took a bucket of cold water and poured it over her younger sister, adding that this was why other people would never see her. A drenched Atisha sat with her gaze downcast. Unable to defend herself, she pushed the memories aside, and there they were again, standing in the middle of the hall, surrounded by a large crowd of people. Larianne's grip on her sister's hands tightened. Atisha calmly asked, "Can't you play with dolls anymore? I don't even know when that might happen. It's scary." Miss Larianne flew into a rage at this question. She shouted at the whole room that this was exactly it. This was terrible. The girl ordered her to quickly return to the mansion. Stay home and not come back. Usually, when this happens, the only one she can listen to is her sister Larianne, because Atisha Heinz is obedient. She's timid and weak, unable to even squeak. But not this time. Atisha tore herself from her sister's arms and screamed that she didn't want to go back. She wasn't going to go back. The girl said she would stay at the banquet. If Larianne didn't want to see her, she could go home. Larianne was very surprised by this answer. Atisha continued, "Can't you hear me? I told you to go home. And not just today, but until the National Foundation banquet ends. Atisha will be coming here every day." Whether or not to go home was up to Larianne. The girl turned and was about to leave. But suddenly, her sister grabbed her painfully by the shoulder and was already swinging her hand at her. The girl had already closed her eyes, but there was no response. Atisha didn't understand what had happened. He was definitely about to slap her. When she opened her eyes, she saw Duke Cayenne of Wintel standing next to her, tightly grabbing her sister's hand to prevent her from hitting her. He turned to Miss Larianne and asked what she was doing. She was shocked and didn't know what to say. The man asked, "Doesn't your family value education?" He can't believe they're engaging in such violence. It's more like what's happening in the valley. Larianne wondered why the Duke had stood up for Atisha. She introduced herself and asked him to let her go, as she was in pain. He, of course, let me go, but said that there wouldn't be a second time. Larianne looked at him with disbelief and asked what he meant. Duke Cayenne of Wintel said that if she raised her hand against Lady Atisha Heinz again, she would not go unpunished. Larianne couldn't believe what she heard. The man asked Atisha if she was okay. She replied that she was fine. He asked if this happened all the time. So that's why she asked to be taken north? The girl simply looked down at the floor in response. He turned pale and said, "How awful!" Then suddenly, Larianne Heinz, not the whole room, screamed, "North!" He said north. The girl didn't understand what it all meant. Everyone began to buzz. They immediately began discussing the news that Miss Atisha and Duke Wintel would be traveling north together. Larianne started yelling at her sister. "Are you going north? Tisha, look me in the eye and explain yourself. How dare you go anywhere?" Etisha replied that it was a personal matter between her and the Duke. She didn't need it. Larian said it was all a lie. Since when had she known Duke Wintel? The man interrupted her and turned to Lady Hines. Miss Larian responded immediately. He said, "Lady Hines, let's forget about what happened." Etisha couldn't believe it. She didn't think Duke Cayenne would refuse to marry her, a lady from a family that behaved like that. Cayenne said that instead of the last day of the banquet, he will announce it right now. Etisha asked again. Duke Cayenne of Wintel said, "I announce our marriage." Larian Hines was furious. She couldn't believe what the man said. The Duke took Etisha's hand and raised it up, thereby showing everyone the ring on her finger. The guy said that Lady Etisha Hines would become his wife and would take the surname Wintel. Anyone who dares to tarnish her reputation will also tarnish him, Duke Cayenne of Wintel. He said loudly that this was his eternal promise in the name of the Lord. Those around them were perplexed. Did they really get married? Larian Hines stood there mumbling that it was all a lie. Her Tisha couldn't marry Duke Cayenne of Wintel. The girl thought that her sister's condition could not be called normal. She was sick. Etisha didn't know what to do if Larian told everyone about my hypermania syndrome. If she reveals to the public the truth that the new Duchess of Wintel is terminally ill, Etisha doesn't know if the Duke's vassals will insist that he take another girl as his wife. She came closer to her sister and said that since she would become the Duchess of Wintel, she would leave home. Larian came even closer in response and said, "No, Tisha, you made the wrong choice. You're sick and that's not normal." The girl was sure something had happened to Tisha's head too. Larian asked if she was right. Etisha asked what she was talking about. Larian replied, "Oh, my poor little sister. You're a silly but sweet child. She doesn't think she can't just wait and watch." She knew Tisha was supposed to stay in her room. It was so scary. The girl called Tisha crazy. The Duke turned to Larian Hines and said that the only abnormal person here was her. Larian furiously asked him again. The man replied that Miss Etisha had clearly stated that she would become the Duchess of Wintel. He added that to tarnish the reputation of Etisha would also tarnish the reputation of Duke Cayenne of Wintel. The Duke shouted at her to go away and pointed his finger at the door. She shouted that this couldn't be happening. The Duke raised his voice and again ordered her to get out of sight. He added that she should think about her behavior in the mansion until the banquet was over and until he and his future wife, Miss Etisha, returned to the north. The man said that he didn't even want to see her and once again told her to leave. Larian came to her senses and began to talk to Tisha in a sweet voice, asking that they return to the mansion together. She suddenly said that this time they would play with dolls together. Etisha Hines shrank back and turned pale. The Duke noticed this and said she didn't look well. The girl turned away from her sister and looked at the Duke with frightened eyes, asking again. Cayenne said that she had better rest and offered her his hand, waiting for her to choose. The girl placed her hand on his, and together they left the main hall, leaving Larian. All around, there was laughter at Larian and bewilderment at the Duke's decision. Larian Hines was left standing alone in the middle of the room. All she could do was clench her teeth and curl her fists. Etisha sat in the well-lit room, thinking about what had happened. Who would have thought her wedding would be announced the following day? The sister will definitely tell their parents everything, and there are 2 days left until the end of the banquet. The girl was very afraid that her father would take that whip again. Cayenne approached her and asked if she was okay. The girl was even afraid to look at him. She said that she had quarreled with her sister too much and possibly gotten him into big trouble. The man replied that when she returned to the ballroom, everyone would completely forget about what had happened, blessing them. He hoped she understood this. The girl looked down and asked if he was telling the truth. The Duke added that although he was a little rude, Miss Hines asked why. He replied that he had been hasty in announcing their wedding. The girl immediately began to deny it. She said it wasn't rude. The Duke had been a great help to her. Etisha smiled. The man thought about her words about helping her. He didn't do it to help her. And in order to preserve the honor and dignity of Wintels, as the head of the family, the girl replied that the reason didn't matter. He helped her anyway. She felt she had received his help. The Duke asked, "Is it true?" Etisha said this is the first time anyone has put Larian Hines in her place. She added that she had this feeling in her heart. He would never understand it. The Duke thought for a moment and replied that he might understand her. He asked her what she planned to do next. She replied that she didn't know for sure. Etisha asked if she would be heading north after the banquet. The guy replied no. He emphasized that he was asking about her plans for this evening. The Duke asked if she would return to the Hines mansion or go with him. The girl imagined all the horror that awaited her at home and froze. Cayenne of Wintel asked if he understood correctly that she didn't want to be involved with her family. Etisha said he was right. The guy said that since they were going north, he was inviting her to his villa in the capital. Since they have already officially announced their wedding, there will be no scandals about them being together for 2 days. The girl hadn't even expected the Duke to be so considerate. The only thing she could do for him was die quickly. She thanked him for it, but said she couldn't do that. Cayenne said that she was his partner. He offers this to her because he is worried that she might get hurt after being in the Hines mansion. Atisha was shocked. No one had ever cared about her. Cayenne added that if she'd thought it through, he suggested they go to his villa now. Atisha said she would do so and thanked him. The man, in response to her gratitude, said that it was of no use and that she did not need to thank him. He's not doing this to help her. Miss interrupted him and said that even if he hadn't intended to help her, she received help. Therefore, she should thank him with all her heart. The Duke looked at his companion and realized how important this was to her. Meanwhile, at the Hines estate, the family learned of the marriage of Duke Cayenne of Wintel to their daughter. When my father found out, he jumped up from his seat and shouted that this couldn't be. What kind of marriage could there be between Atisha and Duke Cayenne of Wintel? The man asked himself what talent his daughter had to become a duchess. Madame Dorothea said there were rumors the Duke had a mistress. Her father continued to shout at her about how the prince could decide to marry without his family's consent. Larianne Hines ran into the room and screamed at her parents, asking if Atisha could get married. The girl, with tears in her eyes, hoped that she would return to her, back to their home. The stepmother replied that if they gave her away, what family would want to take her back? She was a complete zero in everything. The father told them to be quiet. He himself became thoughtful and began stroking his mustache. He thought about it and firmly said that they should not interfere with their wedding. If she marries Duke Wintel, they will have connections. They'll be able to expand their business all the way to the north and even build new routes there. Larian was categorically against this and therefore shouted the word "daddy" throughout the palace. He told her to calm down and added that this was a unique opportunity. Larian continued screaming that Tisha would soon die because she had hypermania syndrome. Then the girl's mother intervened. She asked how he could send a child with such an illness. What if something happened, for example, at a banquet? What then? The father replied that this meant they needed to send her north as soon as possible. They both looked at him in surprise, and the daughter asked again. The man replied that if they made it in time, the incident would happen in the north, and they'll just pretend they knew nothing about her illness. Dorothea replied that was an excellent plan. The person who diagnosed Atisha syndrome was their family doctor. If they shut him up, then there will be nothing to worry about. Father said they had little time left before Atisha died. They had to make arrangements with the Wintel family. They would arrange everything. Larianne suddenly screamed that she didn't want this. She didn't want Atisha to become Wintel. The girl wants Tisha locked in the mansion. She started talking her mother into it. She, in turn, asked her husband what he would do with the dowry. If she married the Duke, they would have to pay a huge sum as a dowry. Father smiled and said that he had already decided everything. He had calculated everything. The carriage in which the Duke and Duchess were sitting was driving through the city at night. Atisha couldn't believe she was in the same carriage with the Duke, whom she had met just yesterday. She was so captivated by what was happening. For the first time in a long time, she found herself free. She looked at her future husband and admired him. He looked thoughtful, and it occurred to her that he really was handsome. Duke Cayenne is often considered the second most handsome man in the empire, which Atisha considered wrong. His Majesty the Emperor must always come first. For her personally, the Duke is the most handsome. The Duke and His Majesty the Emperor had been close friends since their youth, as His Majesty had grown up in the north and not in the capital when he was still a prince. Besides, they fought together. Atisha wondered if beautiful people are always close. She was pulled from her thoughts by the voice of Duke Cayenne. He called her name, addressing her. The girl wondered if she had really been staring at him so obviously. The man asked her if she could handle the cold well, because it was very cold in the north. The Duke said that of course she knew it, but it was not a very good place for the sick. The girl replied that she couldn't stand the cold, but she would endure anything, so he shouldn't worry. Especially during the journey north, she will not be a burden to him. Cayenne said that since they were going north, it would be difficult to meet people in the capital again. He asked her if she had a close friend she'd like to connect with. She replied that she had no friends. If she spoke to her peers, her sister would stand between them and interrupt the conversation. Larian constantly gossiped behind her back. Atisha thought he'd asked her something she hadn't even considered. Maybe he was genuinely concerned about her? He was warning her in advance that she wouldn't like it in the north and would want to leave. At the moment of the marriage announcement, Atisha did not think of running away, although Kayan asked if he could ask her one last question. He needed to clarify something. The girl, of course, replied that she could. The man asked if she wanted to sever ties with the Heinz family. Or does she want revenge? Or perhaps an apology from them, the girl thought. Suddenly, the carriage hit a rock at high speed and almost flipped over. Etisha closed her eyes, but a moment later, she was already in the arms of the Duke himself. The man asked if she was okay, but the girl was unable to say a word due to the unexpected turn of events. The miss immediately began to apologize, but the Duke stopped her and said that it was the driver's fault, so she had nothing to apologize for. He added that when they arrived at the mansion, he would talk to him. Etisha thought that he spoke so coldly, but despite this, it was so warm in his arms. She told him that it was all because of the road, not the driver, and that there was no need to order it because a stone had hit him. The Duke turned to her and said that she was too kind, but the guilty party must be brought to justice and receive appropriate punishment. For some reason, the girl felt like the guilt and punishment the Duke spoke of weren't directed at the driver. She recalled his words about the Heinz family's place. Etisha thought that because she was so close to him, she could feel his breath, and she felt like she understood the Duke's emotions. They were passionate, a fiery, vengeful spirit hidden beneath a heartless gaze. The girl looked at him and wondered who he could take revenge on. She approached the Duke and said she wasn't sure. Etisha still hadn't been able to do anything. Leaving the Heinz family took great courage. She never once considered revenge. Etisha Wintle wondered what she really wanted from this family. She doesn't have time to think about it, but she knows one thing for sure. Everything will be different now. The girl told the Duke that she needed to think about it. First, she wanted to sever all ties with them. The man remained silent, and Etisha immediately asked if this answer was not enough. The Duke let her go and said that this answer was quite sufficient. The carriage arrived at the luxurious villa of Kayan of Wintel late at night. Kayan offered his hand to his bride, and she carefully climbed down. When she looked up, the girl was shocked. Etisha asked if he owned this luxury villa. This mansion was much larger than the Heinz estate. The Duke looked towards the house and replied that the Emperor had given it to him. The girl asked again, "Is it really His Majesty?" The man added that the Emperor had given him the house so that he could visit the capital more often. Etisha admired it and said that, of course, such a mansion could not be left empty. The Duke remarked that Miss Etisha seemed to like the villa. She replied that of course she did. Etisha Heinz entered the huge house, where she was already greeted by servants. Kayan of Wintel said that if she liked the villa so much, she could have it. "No, take it." The girl looked at him with a shocked look, not believing what he said. She asked again, was the Duke really giving her such a huge mansion, the one the Emperor had given him? The man replied that he did not need the mansion, but he could not simply get rid of the gift from His Majesty. He added that wouldn't a gift to his future Duchess be reason enough? Etisha realized it was a wedding gift. It's probably normal for a duke to give a mansion as a gift, but it will still return to him when she dies. The man said he'll hand over the title deeds tomorrow. They need to stay here until they leave for the north, but then the house will be entirely hers. Etisha agreed to accept the gift. She would simply let the Duke do as he pleased. The girl thought that it would be better if she just stayed where she was. She smiled and replied that then she would accept it with gratitude. Etisha Wintle walked and still could not believe that such a large mansion would be hers. She wondered if the Duke was really impressed by such a huge mansion. Kayan of Wintel has always been expressionless. He cuts off a man's head without blinking an eye. He is known as a brutal monster on the battlefield. The Duke is cold-blooded. But the Kayan observed by Etisha Heinz is nothing like that. He's inexpressive, but not cold, as everyone says. The girl thought the rumors were false, because he simply doesn't express his thoughts and is prone to rudeness. She feels that if you get to know him better, he is very attentive. But it's true, the Duke was kind to her from the very beginning. He protected her from her sister. It's probably because she'll be his fake Duchess, or because she'll die soon. Duke Kayan of Wintel seems like a very good person to her. The man said the maid would show her to her room. The girl agreed. He added that they would see each other tomorrow then, and they both wished each other good night. When the girl found herself in her room, she immediately noticed the balcony. She went out and admired it. Everything was so beautiful. Not just the mansion. She felt like even this little piece of heaven belonged to her. In the morning, the girl got up when the sun was already high above the horizon. Suddenly, the maid, Marin, knocked on her door. She said she had brought water for washing and asked permission to enter. Etisha shouted that she could come in, and a maid rushed into the room with a bowl of water. Marin said she needed to hurry up and wash up, and then go to the living room. Etisha asked what had happened there. The maid replied that the Duke had invited designers, the capital's most famous fashion designer, a jewelry designer, and a shoe designer. The girl added that they were all waiting for Miss Atisha. Tisha was perplexed. Atisha walked down the corridor, and when she came to the right doors, she looked inside them. There were 3 beautifully dressed people sitting in the room. The clothing designer was Vivian, the jeweler was Lucy, and the shoemaker was Nigel. The girl reflected on the many gifts these people had bestowed on Larian. The maid asked if everything was all right. Larian was the center of attention for her daily antics, becoming a muse for designers. So she constantly ordered Tisha to do her bidding. She ordered her to go to Vivian's and pick up the dress she'd ordered, and on the way, to stop by Nigel's and pick up her shoes. Vivian yelled at her that the dress was still being sewn and that she had made a mistake in the deadline. The more Atisha ran errands, the more she was looked down upon and ignored. They treated her as if she were their sister's maid. However, her role today is to pretend to be the Duchess of Wintel. She didn't need to feel depressed in front of them. The girl touched the door handle. When she entered the room, Atisha gave everyone a smile, saying that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and asked how they were all doing. All 3 were stunned. They probably hadn't heard the news of the wedding. Vivian and Lucy began whispering, wondering why they were there so early in the morning. Lucy suggested that she might be the rumored mistress. Atisha Wintel calmed down and realized that the news had not reached them yet. The girl turned to them and said that she had been told that all 3 of them were guests of the Duke of Cayenne. She asked them to tell her about the tasks the Duke had assigned to them. All 3 fell silent, and the girl once again asked someone to tell her. No one dared to talk to her, so she decided to take action. Atisha said it seemed like they had nothing to say. If there was nothing to do, then she was off. Vivian shouted at her to wait a minute. She explained that they had received a request from the Duke. He said he needed a dress, jewelry, and shoes for the founding banquet. They know that the Duke turned to them specifically for help, but Tisha calmly took a cup of tea in her hand and quietly said that it looked like the Duke had some surprises in store. All 3 looked at her questioningly and asked what she meant by that. The girl smiled at them and said that this time these things were ordered for her. Vivian couldn't believe it. The Duchess told them she'd need them that evening to attend the second-day banquet in honor of the founding of the state. She added that since she would be the one wearing them, it had to be a masterpiece worthy of the Wintel name. Nigel told her that if she needed it by this evening, they simply wouldn't have time. Atisha asked if they all used mana to absorb it into materials. The girl looked at them confidently, as if she was sure they could do anything. Vivian started screaming that they couldn't use up all their mana. If they took her order, they wouldn't be able to take any more for 3 months. They'll have to close their salons for that time, Atisha asked, surprised. She asked her if the Duke's request meant nothing to her. Atisha thought she couldn't let them see that she was nervous. She needs to control herself because her role is to impersonate the Duchess. The more she distracts people's attention, the more pleased the Duke is. She told herself again to act confident. She thought maybe she should emulate Larian. She remembered Larian shouting at her, "If I tell you to work, then work. If I tell you to work right now, then get to it." Atisha pushed those thoughts aside. Even so, she didn't want to be like her sister. She said she understood, meaning Vivian's designer was canceling the dress order. She looked at Lucy and Nigel and asked what about them. Lucy looked at her and couldn't believe that she was really the Duke's mistress. What was the Duke thinking when he chose such a simpleton as she? Nigel was thinking the same thing. He had a theory that she had somehow gotten the opportunity to temporarily live in this mansion and was now simply bluffing. The clothing designer couldn't resist asking Miss Hines what her relationship was like with the Duke. The girl replied that she was being disrespectful. How could they ask personal questions of clients? Vivian was already full of rage and wanted to make a scandal, but then they heard the Duke's voice calling Lady Atisha. He stood at the door and warned that he wanted to come in. Atisha shouted to him that he could come in. All 3 of them, realizing what was happening, got up from the sofa and froze. When the man walked in, the professionals said they were pleased to meet him. Cayenne said he was a little late because he was figuring out how land ownership worked. As it turns out, the ownership of this villa is included in the price, along with the ownership of the surrounding land. He came closer to Atisha and asked him to put his hand here. She laid it down, and the Duke said that from that moment on, she was the owner of this villa. Lucy didn't understand what was happening. Wasn't this too much, even for a mistress? But then suddenly, she noticed a ring on Miss Atisha's finger. I realized that this girl was not a mistress, but a future duchess. She stepped forward and leaned over to say she was flattered they had given her this chance. If they rely on them, they will make a masterpiece like no other in this world, worthy of Wintel's reputation. Nigel said that, as expected, Even if he had to use all the materials he had saved, he would still make the most beautiful shoes in the entire country. Vivian fell to her knees and began begging for forgiveness for her rudeness. She promised to make the best dress possible. Cayenne of Wintle replied that it was all for the joy of his wife. But Miss Atisha doesn't look happy right now for some reason. The Duke turned to his bride and said that she did not need to listen to them. There are enough designers. They'll find others. He'll send these ones back. Atisha said to wait. No matter how they treated her, if it became known that these designers had lost the trust of Duke Cayenne, they'll have to close their salons. The girl added that that's enough for her. She approached the Duke and said he'd spend his time selecting the designers. Everything would be fine, even if he didn't send them back. The man asked if everything was all right. The Duchess replied that it was. He'd arrived at the mansion empty-handed, and she needed something to wear too. She'd been to their salons a couple of times. She could safely trust them with her order. The Duke replied that it was up to her. It didn't matter whether she needed to hire other designers. She could do whatever she wanted. Atisha sincerely thanked the Duke for such trust in her. Cayenne said that he would be gone for a short while and would return after lunch. The girl replied that she understood when the door closed and turned to the designers. She told them happily, "Dress, jewelry, shoes. Where shall we begin?" Meanwhile, the Duke was walking through the garden of his wife's villa, thinking about her words. "Even though you didn't intend to help me, I received help, so I have to thank you from the bottom of my heart." The man realized she was right. He told her he wouldn't help, but the truth was, he did. It doesn't even matter whether it's a hasty wedding announcement or an invitation to a mansion, or even a designer's call. All of this could be considered a normal relationship, like the future Duchesses of Wintel. And for everything else, apparently, there is something to be thankful for. He doesn't want her to know the meaning of this tablet until the very end. If she guesses why he is helping her, he pushed these thoughts away. He promised himself that they would never use the nameplate. A carriage was already waiting for him outside the mansion. When he stepped inside, he saw his assistant and a pile of papers nearby. Val de Prames said that he had already studied them, as the Duke had ordered. She gave him the papers and said that it was an investigation report of the Heinz family and Lady Etisha Heinz. The Duke already knew some of the details. The Viscount had remarried. Portrait of a stepsister. Etisha is a weak, lonely, and ordinary girl. The Duke asked about the 3 designers he had invited and their relationship with Lady Etisha. The aide replied that they were all close with Larian Heinz. Whenever Miss Larian visited the salons, she used Lady Etisha as a spare porter. To deliberately taunt her, she repeatedly sent her out to pick up orders, even when they weren't ready yet. There were days when she was even kicked out of the salons altogether. Cayenne of Wintle thought, Etisha Heinz, white face, pink hair. What deeply surprises the Duke is her composure. Her life had been filled with contempt and cruel relationships, yet when he asked her about her place, he remembered her words. "What do I really want from this family? I don't have time to think about it." The Duke thought that she wanted something, but it would take time. Once she becomes the Duchess of Wintel, she will definitely make those who insulted her apologize. He thought that it was also likely that she would want cruel revenge. She might want to strip Viscount Heinz of his title, or use family members who have become commoners as servants, so that no one would dare to look down on her again, as they did before. She will have the power to make them kneel before her. However, he remembered her words about how she hadn't even thought about the place. How was that possible? Because she's terminally ill? Cayenne thought that if he only had a year to live, they would have had very different choices. He continued to look at the report about her. If she had known about them in advance, she would have turned to other designers. The man asked the carriage to stop. Val de Prames didn't understand why he wanted to do this. He replied that he urgently needed to go to the Imperial Palace. He hadn't seen him for a long time. Lady Etisha sat looking out the window at the sunset in her chic outfit. The maid came up to her and asked if they needed more tea. Miss replied that it wasn't worth it. She was afraid her stomach wouldn't appreciate that much liquid. The girl wondered where the Duke had gone. If she asked the servants, they would say they didn't know. He had left the mansion that morning and hadn't returned yet. They were supposed to go together to the banquet in honor of the founding of the state, but they don't even have time to prepare. An idea struck her. Maybe he had gone to see his mistress? If the Duke came to the capital with his mistress, that is the reason why the servants say nothing. If this is the Duke's personal life, it's none of her business. It's just a contractual marriage with no real feelings attached, because she was the one who made that promise. The girl didn't notice how she fell asleep. She was awakened by the voice of her maid, who announced that the Duke had returned. She came downstairs and saw him standing and looking at the painting. She said to him, "Welcome back." Cayenne apologized and said that he returned later than planned. Unexpectedly, he noticed how gorgeous she looked in her new outfit. She was all aglow. The designers had done a great job. The thought flashed through his mind that she was very beautiful. The Duke asked if she had been waiting for him. The girl replied that she had, but not for long. Etisha thanked him for giving her a new dress, jewelry, and shoes. It was the first time she had such beautiful clothes. She was over the moon. Cayenne of Wintle suddenly looked surprised. The girl didn't understand what had happened. He thought about how happy she was. Didn't it matter who made them? The man quickly said that it suited her very well and walked away from her. Etisha didn't understand his behavior. Didn't he like the dress? He stopped in front of the doors and said that he would find her other designers in the north. The lady replied that it was fine, but she thought that it seemed like he really didn't like the dress. On the second day of the banquet, in honor of the founding of the state, many people came. One of the invitees said that there was some kind of commotion yesterday, it seemed. The woman told him that it happened to Lady Hines. Her daughter told her about it. Another man said that if he had known about this, he would have come yesterday. Aristocrats who had missed the performance the day before were asking the same question. Would Miss Etisha become the Duchess of Wintel? Isn't the Duke as unapproachable as a flower on the peak of a snowy mountain? The man replied that it was a good point. You wouldn't even dare climb up there. And even if you did, you wouldn't survive. The woman said that Etisha was spineless, weak, and not even beautiful. She's the most insignificant girl in the whole world. Etisha Hines. Unexpectedly, Etisha Hines's father burst into the banquet, shouting about a wonderful evening. All the guests were shocked by his appearance. Could it be that Viscount Hines had arrived to propose to his daughter? The guests exchanged glances. Larian's expression was clear that she hadn't heard about his wedding. And Viscount Hines? The woman decided to approach him and congratulate him. She said that apparently he was having a party at home. The man happily explained that this was exactly how it should be, and the Duke took a liking to Etisha. One of the barons could not resist asking if he really thought Miss Etisha would become a duchess. Etisha's father replied that it seemed the Duke had fallen in love with Etisha at first sight. No matter how big he is, he's still young. The man asked if it wasn't wonderful to be in your prime. The guests couldn't believe it. The rumors were true. This ruthless Duke had fallen in love. The Viscount said that Duke Cayenne of Wintel treasured his daughter. They can't live without each other. He looked at this crowd of people and realized that everyone had fallen for it. The Baron asked why Miss Larian had reacted to the news the way she had yesterday. The father smiled and said that, as they all knew, his eldest daughter was a little immature. He hid the wedding from her so she wouldn't be jealous of her younger sister. She knew nothing. The nobles believed him. The man thought for a moment and said that, however, he was only worried about one thing. The Baron asked what he could worry about when everything was already settled. Father continued to say that, you see, the Duke said that he would not accept a penny of the dowry. The crowd was outraged. What an outrage! Was he really not going to take anything? The Baroness shared with her friends that the wedding announcement shocked her. She believed the Duke often stood up for Miss Etisha. Other guests discussed how Wintles didn't seem to care about a few pennies in dowry. Their discussion was interrupted by the Viscount, who asked if this was what love was. The man said that the Duke probably thought that money couldn't buy love. The guests were shocked. Could this really be the same Duke? A merciless monster, the great Duke of the North. Wherever his sword is, there are corpses. This Duke Wintel? Viscount Hines looked at the surprised faces of these people and was delighted. Everything was working out just as he hadn't intended. The man continued to say that even in this case, they would not tarnish the honor of the Hines family. How could they not provide the slightest dowry? But the Duke was too stubborn. People began to calm him down and say that if Duke Cayenne said so, what could he do? He didn't want to offend the Duke by doing something. The Viscount was already thanking God. Now the Duke wouldn't be able to do anything against public opinion. He could say that instead of a dowry, he would have to invest the money in northern trading. He called it a brilliant plan. He was brought back from his reverie by the news that Duke Cayenne Wintel and Lady Etisha Hines had arrived. The most insignificant wildflower that aristocrats ever knew has arrived. Now the gem that shines the brightest in this room. The man told the others to look at how the manna flowed through her clothes and jewelry. The woman replied that if he had spent so much on Miss Etisha, it meant it was true that he had fallen in love with her. Viscount Hines, seeing the couple, moved towards them with outstretched arms. He said he was so happy that Etisha was finally getting married, but on the other hand, he was sad. It was hard to let go of the daughter he raised. He asked her if this was true, and asked her to come up to her daddy and hug him. Father was always strict with Etisha, and in general was a terrible father, and never smiled at her. He showed his tender side only to her sister Larianne. The girl was sure that when he found out about her wedding, he would take her back to the Heinz mansion and lock her up. Would such a father really celebrate her wedding? She rejected the thought. You can't fool her! Her father never loved her. Atisha pushed him away. The girl said he looked too happy for him. The Viscount asked what she was talking about. His daughter was getting married. Of course he would be happy. The girl asked, isn't it true that he is happy because she is marrying the Duke of Cayenne? The father was at a loss. His daughter was obedient, so why was she behaving like this? Atisha continued, if that's not the case, then is he happy that she's leaving the house? She told her father that he always tried to drive her away and wanted her to die. Viscount Heinz laughed and said he couldn't remember ever saying such a thing. He asked me not to joke. The man asked why she was upsetting her father so much. She should stop. Come over and hug him. Atisha looked sad. Her father grabbed her by the shoulder and pulled her toward him. He asked her if she was afraid that it would become known that she had hypermania syndrome. If the truth comes out, what will happen to her wedding? Atisha Heinz didn't expect such a threat from her father. The Viscount continued to say that the Duke would then have big problems. The girl wanted to answer him, but he interrupted her. The man said he didn't want that. He wants to maintain close ties with the Wintel family. Therefore, Atisha must stop rebelling needlessly. Her father ordered her to hurry up and pretend that she was going to hug her father. The girl looked at him and thought, tomorrow is the last day of the banquet. The day after tomorrow, she'll leave for the north. She can tolerate him for these 2 days. As always, if she obeys her father for one more day. The voice of her future husband brought her out of her thoughts. The Duke ordered the Viscount to stop. The man turned pale and tried to justify himself by saying that it was not what he thought. Cayenne of Wintel asked him what he was doing. He responded by apologizing. He was so happy to see his daughter that he completely forgot to greet him. The man turned to the Duke again and asked him to be generous and forgive him for the sake of his daughter, because they would soon become relatives. The Duke thought that before him was just a snob who was not against oppression and violence against the weak, but stooped before the strong. He turned to Atisha, but the Viscount interrupted him, saying that he and his daughter urgently needed to talk about the wedding, or rather, about the dowry. The man thought that he would force the Duke to bend over backwards before him. Cayenne of Wintel turned to Atisha and said that she had said that she wanted to break with the Heinz family. Has her opinion changed? The girl replied that her opinion will always remain the same. The father watched from the sidelines, wondering what they were chatting about. He decided to distract the Duke. Duke Cayenne here is a video for him that in the Heinz family, there is no need to burden themselves with any worries related to their marriage. The Viscount couldn't believe what he was hearing. Had the Duke really heard him speak to that aristocrat? No, it couldn't have happened that quickly. The man replied that the Duke had said he wouldn't accept the dowry. If so, he suggests setting a wedding date as soon as possible. The Duke asked what was unclear about his words. He said the Heinz family had nothing to worry about, nothing to do with their marriage. The man froze in place. Cayenne of Wintel continued that Lady Atisha is renouncing the Heinz name from today onwards. This means that she will have nothing to do with the Heinz family. The Viscount asked him what he meant by that. Atisha is his daughter. How can he do this without her family's consent? How dare he? Everyone was warned that Lassus Ignavan, His Majesty the Emperor, was entering. The man entered and noted that it was very noisy and almost everyone was drunk. He approached Cayenne, saying that he was the last one to know about his wedding, and asked how it all started. He asked His Majesty to do what he had to first. Lassus replied that he wouldn't leave him alone. Cayenne asked him to be quiet. Atisha's father intervened in their conversation, telling Your Majesty that it was an honor for him to meet him and introducing himself as a Viscount from the Heinz family. Lassus Ignavan replied that he was asking for forgiveness. He was the same man who dared to exclude his daughter from the family. The Viscount asked what he was talking about. The Emperor laughed and said it seemed Duke Cayenne hadn't told him yet. The Duke entrusted ownership of part of the capital's territory to Atisha Heinz. And as he knows, the owners of capital territories are awarded a title. Atisha's father asked again. Lassus asked if he needed further explanation. A new surname is given not to aristocrats inheriting family lands, but to those who inherit new territory. All this means that Miss Atisha is no longer a member of the Heinz family. The Emperor smiled at Cayenne and gave a thumbs up. Duke Cayenne came closer to the Viscount and turned to him and asked if he understood now. He, in turn, was unable to even move due to the unexpected news. The Duke took a sign from his pocket and said that Lady Atisha was now a baroness. He continued that this is why she is no longer part of the Heinz family. Therefore, there is no need to treat Vintels as relatives of the Heinz family. The man came even closer to Viscount Heinz and told him to try not to get his hopes up. just because Atisha and he are getting married, and he shouldn't even think of threatening him. The Viscount didn't know what to do next. Now the Duke himself stood before him, wanting him to get out of here. Behind him stands the Emperor, who dared to remove Atisha from his family. There were groups of people standing around them, shocked by what was happening. The man had no idea what to do in this situation, but then an idea struck him. He rushed to Atisha and asked if she had arranged all this. What had she told the Duke and His Majesty? The man fell at the Duke's feet and said that it was not what he thought. He doesn't know what his daughter said about the Heinz family, but it's all untrue. In his family, the daughters were raised quite strictly. Not all parents with daughters are like them. This is simply so that his daughters become worthy women. The Viscount rushed at Atisha again. He began shouting that they had fed and raised her, and this was how she repaid them. She just abandoned her parents. Is this what they taught her? The girl couldn't answer, because she had a lump in her throat from such accusations. Viscount Heinz said it was unfair. He asked the Duke to listen to him. Here, Atisha told her father that she never said anything bad about her family. Everyone turned their attention to her. The girl said she was leaving her family. That's what he wanted. The Viscount asked what she was saying. Atisha came even closer to him and told him to remember what happened 7 years ago. She was 13 years old then. She and her father were riding home in a carriage. Then her father swung at her. Atisha fell and hit herself hard. The man told her she was pathetic. When she met those robbers, they should have killed or kidnapped her. The father added that not seeing her was a breath of fresh air. The Viscount reached for the door handle and opened it. A strong gust of wind blew. The girl covered her face with her hands. She screamed at her dad, but he only told her to get out of there. The man said that she was going to die soon anyway, so it would be better for her to just disappear, and he pushed her. Atisha recalled this with tears in her eyes. She will never forget this incident. If the coachman had not stopped the carriage, then the carriage would have crushed her. They must answer for this. The Viscount replied that it was such an old story. In the end, everything turned out fine with her. Their family doctor helped her, and there weren't even any scars left. The girl began to deny it. She still has a scar from that day. No matter how much it hurt her, she should have left home then and there. She was a few years late, but now she was definitely leaving. In her last words, she asked that we no longer look for her. The Duke turned to Viscount Heinz and asked if this was what he called strict upbringing. The man was afraid to look the Duke in the eye and tried to quickly find an excuse. Cayenne of Wintel advised him not to even think about throwing anything away. The Viscount began to be indignant. He thought that Duke Cayenne, Emperor Ignavon, and even Etisha, they're all conspiring against him and his Heinz family. Viewers of this brawl were already buzzing with excitement. Now they know what Viscount Heinz is really like. The woman said it wasn't about love or a dowry. She sensed something was wrong the moment the Duke mentioned it. The Baron said that if he were in his place, he would lock himself in his house. What a shame. The Viscount only now noticed these people. He rushed towards the front doors in disgrace. The Emperor applauded this performance and now asked for the music to be returned. Atisha and Cayenne of Wintel continued to stand silently until Atisha spoke first. The girl smiled and asked the Duke if it was true that she would become a baroness. The man replied that it was true. This was done specifically to sever any ties with the Heinz family. He continued to say that today at noon, he transferred the land into the ownership of the mansion. These lands are under the direct jurisdiction of the Emperor. Since it is temporary, the ownership and title will expire after a certain period of time. By that time, they'll already be in the north, so no problem. Atisha thought it was interesting how far ahead he thought things through. He literally took action within a day. It's impressive for a man to possess such an ability. After all, he rules a vast northern territory. The girl bowed low to the Duke and sincerely thanked him for helping her. The man replied that he was glad he could help her. He was worried that he might do something wrong. Atisha began to deny it and say that she was sincerely grateful to him. He was her savior. She was glad that this time he didn't deny helping her and accepted her gratitude. Cayenne added that the mansion was hers and that it wasn't a lie. He wouldn't disappear. She looked at him and asked the Duke why he was so kind to her. After all, for him she is just the one who will become his false duchess. The man couldn't answer, but only clenched his fists tighter. Atisha smiled and thought, of course it's the Duke. He doesn't know how to express his emotions. She knows about the rumors that are circulating around Duke Cayenne. However, the girl noted that the Duke was very caring with her. The man said what he thought. Lady Atisha did not understand something. He didn't have time to finish speaking before the Emperor called out to him, saying that he had finally found him. Laces said that of course it's a bit late, but his congratulations on the wedding. The man asked if he had really announced the wedding without a notary. He had given him a mansion and even land. Etisha noticed that the Duke looked disappointed. The Emperor continued to say that he thought Cayenne would always be alone, but he suddenly decided to get married. He doubts this is really the Duke Wintel he knows. Cayenne asked him to step aside and stop spouting nonsense. Emperor Ignavan turned to Lady Etisha and said that he would leave Cayenne in her care. He also presented her with a wedding gift. If she sends a message using it, it will reach him immediately. If she needs help, she can turn to him. Etisha, with surprise on her face, thanked His Majesty. The man said he would send a certificate of nobility and a letter of appointment by tomorrow. In the meantime, they should enjoy the banquet. Etisha thought that she had received a wonderful gift. If she carried it in her hands, she might lose it. So the girl put it around her neck. The Duke approached her and looked at the pendant. He became thoughtful. The man said that they would probably have to return to the mansion early and asked if she minded. The girl agreed with the proposal and said that she was also a little tired. Cayenne asked if she was feeling unwell. Etisha replied that she wasn't, simply because of recent events. Eventually, the girl replied that she was just a little tired. She thought it had really been a long day for her, and tomorrow will be the last day of the banquet, and after it, she will leave for the north. Duke Cayenne offered her his hand, and they left the banquet together for their mansion. At this time, at the Heinz mansion, an angry Viscount Heinz returned home. Larian Heinz ran up to him and asked how it had gone. Where was Etisha? Had he brought her home? His wife asked if he had discussed the dowry with the Duke of Cayenne. The man shouted at them to shut up. Madame Dorothea began to get indignant and asked why he was shouting at them. The Viscount kicked a chair and shouted that everything had not gone as he had wanted. He slapped himself in the face and said it was the end. They were doomed. My daughter asked again, "Doomed? What does he mean?" The man sat on the sofa, saying that he had no idea how Etisha seduced this Duke of Cayenne, but she got the land and the title. She completely severed ties with the Heinz family. Larian was shocked. What did it mean that Etisha was no longer a Heinz? She did say that he would take her north on business or something like that. Etisha must return home. She is only her doll. 10 years ago, she first saw Etisha when her parents introduced them. Etisha was shy and looked behind her father in surprise. Later, as Larian walked down the hallway, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned around and saw Etisha. Then she shouted what she needed. Etisha approached her sister Lari and said that she thinks she is the most beautiful in the whole world. She's truly incredible. Everyone loves her, and Etisha loves her very much too. Larian thought it was so cute. She hopes she always keeps Etisha on a leash. Will not go out, meet with friends, will not fall in love with someone. She will be with her forever. She will be hers forever. When Etisha suddenly became ill with hypermania syndrome, she was terrified to imagine her dead body. She had no choice but to lock her in the room. But now, is she leaving forever? Will she never see her again? The girl decided to take action. She would bring her back. Larian Heinz ordered the carriage to be prepared. Madame Dorothea tried to stop her, but the girl didn't hear her. She was only thinking that she should have done this from the very beginning. Only she can bring her back. She will never let her go again, even if she has to die next to her. Her mother shouted at her that she couldn't go. The Duke ordered her to stay here, if she didn't obey. Larian asked her if she thought it was important now. She screamed at him to let her go. Dorothea ordered her to be taken to her room. Larian Heinz tried her best to free herself. The mother merely shouted at the servants to be careful. If she got hurt, they would be punished. She ordered that she be locked in until the end of the banquet, and that care be taken to ensure that she did not leave. In the evening, the Duke and the young lady arrived at the mansion. All the servants were already waiting for them. Etisha approached the maid and said that she would now take her to her room. The girl followed after her, but suddenly she noticed that Marine had turned the wrong way. The Duchess asked them to stop and asked why they were going to the right, since her room was on the wrong side. The maid replied that the Duchess's bedroom had only been prepared yesterday. From now on, it would be her room. She was their Duchess, after all. Etisha was a little shocked, not yet accustomed to such a status. She blushed a little. She was pleased to hear that she was a Duchess. Cayenne of Wintel told her that if she was uncomfortable, she could use the previous room. The girl replied that they had prepared it for her, and she could not refuse. Duke Cayenne walked down the hallway toward his room, followed by Marine and Etisha. The lady noticed this and assumed that their rooms were next to each other. They stopped at the huge doors, and the maid told Etisha that this was now her room. The girl blushed deeply and did not understand why there were two doors. The Duke entered through the next door. The Duchess was stunned. She looked at that door and asked Marin if that meant that the door that Duke Cayenne entered through. The girl interrupted her and said yes. This is the Duke's room. Atisha was a little worried because her room was next to the Duke's. But she's a duchess now. She needs to get used to this. The lady became determined and said that she wanted to come in. But when she walked in, she was delighted. Her room was truly immaculate. Atisha thought she was so nervous because she was right next to his room. The room was much more spacious than she thought. Marin gave her a quick tour of her new room. She showed her the bedroom, the closet, and told her about the small study area. The girl continued that if she looked there, but Atisha interrupted her and said that she didn't have to explain everything. She smiled and said that they would leave for the north tomorrow anyway. Atisha continued that it would be more important if the maid helped her undress. The lady had already taken off her heavy dress and began to take a hot bath. Marin asked Atisha if she would keep the pendant. She said yes. She told her to put away the dress and jewelry. She would also keep the ring. The maid took the dress in her hands and wished Lady Atisha good night. Atisha was savoring the moment. She lay in the middle of a luxurious room in her mansion. The girl lay there and thought only about how soft and warm the bed was. It smelled good too. The guest room was comfortable too, but this room feels safe, like being embraced. Atisha's eyes snapped open, and she found herself thinking about the Duke. The girl wondered what was wrong with her. Why had she thought of the Duke? She couldn't believe she liked the Duke. It couldn't be. Not much time had passed. As a child, Larian Hines made her have no friends at all. She can't talk normally, not only with her peers, but also with other people. She didn't understand why she felt such interest in someone, although she knew practically nothing about love. But still, she thinks about the Duke. Is it because he is kind to her? Kind and gentle. This is the first time she's met such a person. Atisha soon realized that this was it, that very love. So what if she really likes him? She got help from him and wears his family ring. Sleeps in the room opposite his. Is she becoming a real duchess? But she's here for the Duke's mistress. Just a fake. The girl couldn't fall asleep because of her thoughts. She got up and walked to the far side of the room. She saw a large curtain on the wall. Atisha began to wonder why it was there. The thought occurred to her that perhaps this was a hidden painting. When she moved it a little, she saw a door handle. The lady didn't understand why she was there, and so she decided to open the door. For some reason, Atisha didn't think that the Duke's room was behind this door. Duke Cayenne lay in his bed without his outer clothing. She felt like a complete fool when the man asked what she wanted. The girl began to apologize, saying that she didn't know that the rooms were connected. Cayenne replied that rooms for spouses are usually made like this. Atisha remembered how the maid wanted to tell her about it. The girl apologized for the intrusion and was about to leave, but the Duke stopped her. The man said he wanted to talk to her about something. He got out of bed and walked closer to Atisha. She herself was at a loss and didn't know where to look. The girl blushed deeply when the Duke came right up to her. She herself did not understand when he managed to come so close. Atisha wanted to step back a little, but she stepped on her nightgown and realized that she was falling. Cayenne of Wintle reacted instantly and grabbed her with a flick of his wrist. She found herself embraced by his strong arm, pressed against his warm body. The man asked if she was okay. Atisha replied that she was fine. He pressed her slightly towards him so that her feet were slightly off the floor. The girl didn't understand what was happening, but when she looked at the Duke, he looked thoughtful. When he called her name, she was already as red as a beet. He pressed her so hard that she was standing on her tiptoes. Atisha pulled away from his body and, looking into his eyes, asked what was going on. The Duke touched the door handle and said that her room had the same lock. If it closes, there's no way to get to it from this side, so she can rest easy. Atisha thanked him, but in her mind, she couldn't understand how she could have thought about such a thing a second ago. The Duke apologized for this. Atisha didn't quite understand what he meant. A moment later, the man picked up the girl. The lady was very frightened. Cayenne explained this action by saying that it was simply easier to check the damaged area. He carefully laid the fragile girl on his bed. Cayenne of Wintel knelt down in front of her to examine her leg. The girl was embarrassed to see the Duke kneeling in front of her. She thought that she must have fallen asleep, and this was all a dream. Duke Cayenne turned to her and asked her to lift her dress. The girl asked again. The Duke replied that this way he could examine her ankle. It would be impolite for him to lift it himself. Atisha did not believe that the Duke himself wanted to examine her. He would be kneeling before her with her skirt lifted up. She couldn't even dream of such a thing. Atisha slowly lifted her nightgown and offered her leg to the Duke. The man began to carefully examine her. The girl noticed that such silence was too unsettling for her. She asked the Duke what he wanted to talk to her about. Cayenne put her leg down and said that it was about the maid Marine. The girl asked again. He explained that the maid wanted to go north with her. It seemed Maran wanted to continue serving her. Etisha couldn't believe she'd said that. The north is far, if that's what she wants. Etisha doesn't mind, but getting back will be difficult. Cayenne said she had no relatives. She wouldn't be sorry to leave the capital. Etisha thought that there was one thing, but she would die soon, and then… The Duke said the sprain wasn't serious. She'd feel better in a day or two. Etisha thought that he had a lot of experience on the battlefield, so he knew better. Cayenne said their family doctor was in the north, so they'd need to find someone else to treat her. He'd ask someone to find him right away. The girl began to refuse help, saying that it was already late and that it was not that serious. The man was about to deny it, but Lady Etisha began to insist that she was indeed fine. The Duke warned that the leg could swell even more tomorrow. Taking her leg in his hands, he asked if she still wanted to call a doctor. Etisha turned completely red. The man was focused on her ankle. He added that she would not be able to dance at the banquet tomorrow and asked if she wanted to call a doctor anyway. The girl once again began to convince him that everything was fine. She would recover tomorrow. Duke Cayenne noticed the pendant on the girl's neck and asked if it was a gift from His Highness. Etisha replied that yes, she thinks it's very important, so she wears it. He asked if it was even when she was sleeping. The girl, surprised, answered yes. Suddenly, she jumped up and told the Duke that she was fine and would go back to her room. Cayenne replied that it was already dawn, but fine. He added that if anything was bothering her, she could contact him anytime. The girl replied that she would do so. She asked him not to worry and wished him a good night's sleep. As soon as she reached her room, she immediately hid under the blanket out of shame. Etisha was so embarrassed that she thought she wouldn't be able to sleep tonight. The third day of the banquet. The last day also ended successfully. Etisha's leg is fine. She enjoyed her last day in the capital. The Duke said that they would travel to Laxan by carriage, and then north using a teleportation spell. Marin went with them on the long journey. Etisha was happy with this new start to her life, but then the girl noticed that they hadn't left for a long time. A yellow-haired girl approached the carriage and wished her a good day. She said she was pleased to meet her and introduced herself as Judith. The girl sat in the carriage next to the Duke and told Etisha that she could just call her Dith. She asked Cayenne if he'd been waiting for her. Etisha thought about her name, or rather about how she'd introduced herself. She'd only given her first name. A noblewoman wouldn't introduce herself like that. It could mean she's a commoner, but no commoner would have thoughtlessly gotten into the same carriage with a duke. If she were a maid, she would have worn the appropriate attire. Then she must be the duke's mistress. Etisha smiled at Dith and said she was glad to meet her. She was about to introduce herself as Etisha Hines, but remembered the emperor's words. He told her that she would soon become Wintel anyway and wouldn't need her old name. It would be better for her to use her mother's name. Etisha introduced herself as Etisha L. She said she was a baroness. The Duke apologized for not warning her about their companion. The man said that he could not yet tell her who she was. If people find out that she has come to the capital, there will be a fuss. Etisha replied that everything was fine. She understood that, after all, he had to keep his mistress a secret. There was nothing to be sad about. It wasn't long before she met the Duke. There was nothing between them. The man said that therefore, before it was too late, it was better to leave quickly. He tensed and clenched his fists. The carriage moved off. They rode along a path through a dense forest. An awkward silence fell. Etisha kept thinking that it was so strange to meet the very mistress that everyone was rumoring about. She found herself thinking that these two were perfect for each other. Judith appears friendly and seems like a nice person. Etisha wondered if this was why the Duke had fallen in love with her. There was such a good atmosphere between them, but when she intervened, they immediately became quiet. The girl closed her eyes for a second, and Cayenne immediately asked if everything was okay with her. The man said that if she felt sick, they could stop and rest. Etisha immediately responded that she was fine, and there was no need to stop. Marine took a pillow and placed it under Lady Etisha. The girl thanked her. Etisha noticed Judith's distrustful look. The carriage arrived in a small town called Laxan. The Duke announced that they had arrived, and they could get out of the carriage. Etisha looked at the Duke's beautiful mistress with alarm. Marin noticed this and asked if everything was okay with her. Perhaps she was feeling unwell because of such a long journey. The girl replied that everything was fine and offered her hand to the Duke. But when she got out of the carriage, she unexpectedly stumbled and fell into the Duke's arms again. The man asked her to watch her step. Etisha couldn't believe it was happening again. Once again, her lips were so close to the Duke's. In her mind, she wondered what he was doing. Dith is here. She'll be angry with him. But the girl didn't want to let go of his hand. Then she came to her senses. Atisha looked behind the Duke and saw a huge glowing structure. She asked if it was a teleporter. Cayenne replied that it was. The man's assistant approached him and said that the teleport was ready. He added that the Duke had some matters that needed to be addressed. Cayenne asked if it was urgent. The man replied that it was regarding the investigation he had ordered. He glanced discreetly at Atisha. The Duke asked Atisha to wait for him there for a while. The girl replied that he shouldn't worry about her. Cayenne of Wintel and his assistant left, and Atisha was left alone with Judith. The girl heard Dith laugh quietly. She made a questioning face. Judith asked if Cayenne was actually quite difficult to deal with. Atisha asked again, and Judith replied that she meant she didn't know what he was thinking. That's okay. No one does. The girl said that Cayenne is the same as always, both as a child and now. He hasn't changed, so Atisha shouldn't be upset. Atisha wanted to object, but Judith interrupted her, saying that no one could take him away from her. After some time, the Duke returned to them and asked how long they had been waiting. The Duke's assistant said that Miss Judith could teleport along with him and the maid Marine. Judith forced a smile and silently agreed with him. The man told the Duke that they would go first. Cayenne agreed and said that they would meet in the north. The assistant, the maid, and Miss Judith stood in the middle of the teleport and a moment later disappeared. Atisha was delighted to see this. She had never seen a teleporter in action before. Cayenne of Wintel said that it was their turn now and asked them to go there. The Duke stopped and turned to the girl, saying that before teleporting, he would like to tell her something. Atisha asked what exactly. Cayenne replied that he wanted to tell the truth about Judith. There were other people in the carriage, so he could not talk about their relationship with Judith. He needs to be sure that only a few people know about this. The girl replied that she understood. She continued that, frankly, he didn't even have to say anything. She understood the situation anyway. Cayenne asked again. Atisha asked if she understood correctly that Miss Judith was the reason they were getting married. Have a fake duchess with you and spend time with a loving mistress. The Duke replied that she seemed to have misunderstood everything. He would tell her the truth, but the man asked her to keep it a secret when she found out the secret. Cayenne of Wintel explained that Judith is Wintel's weak point. That's why she needs to be hidden. Atisha didn't understand how she could be Wintel's weak point and why she needed to be hidden. That's a pretty intense explanation for wanting to hide his mistress. Is it because he can't tell the whole story? He was always expressionless, but now the girl is even more confused. The guy just started to say that Judith was there, but before he could finish speaking, he saw that Atisha was ill. The man asked what was wrong with her, but the girl could not answer him. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Her heart beat wildly. Atisha L. covered her mouth with her hand to try to calm herself down. The hypermania syndrome kicked in. She fell to her knees, but the Duke immediately rushed to her side. The girl was hysterical. The man didn't know how to help her. After some time, Atisha began to calm down a little. The girl began to apologize to the Duke, to which he replied that it was unnecessary. He took her and pressed her tightly to himself and began to stroke her hair a little. The Duke told her not to be afraid and reassured her with words that everything would be fine. Half an hour later, Atisha rose from his lap and declared that she was feeling better. She lay on the Duke's lap for so long, enjoying his embrace. She thinks she's okay now, and the pain is gone. Atisha wonders if he might think she was faking it. Duke Cayenne asked what she was saying. She couldn't be okay. The girl said it was true. The first symptoms were short-lived. They say that in the later stages of the disease, the condition worsens, but for now it is bearable. The man replied that if she was talking about a syndrome, he knew it. He meant that she was completely out of order. The Duke asked if these were the first symptoms. The girl replied that they were. Cayenne said that means she has until the next ones show up. Atisha L. responded that it looks like that. According to the doctor, the intervals between the pains are long at first, and then they get shorter and shorter towards the end. Until then, she'll have plenty of time to live her life. The man listened and replied that he understood. Atisha began to reassure him again that she was fine. The Duke said he thought she'd better rest for a day, and they'd head north tomorrow. The teleporter's mana could affect her body. The girl replied that everyone was already there and only we remained. Cayenne said it was no big deal. It was actually good that they were together. If anyone saw them, the situation would be more complicated. Atisha looked down and thought that was true. The Duke said that he didn't know what might happen, so he'd better not call anyone. Finally, he suggested they spend the day together. Atisha couldn't believe what he was saying. He spent a long time on the battlefield, so it is more convenient for him to do without an entourage. But Atisha, there are no maids here, so she might be uncomfortable. The girl replied that she didn't mind. The Duke was genuinely concerned for her, and she was no longer in pain. Etisha thanked the Duke for his concern. She told him he was a kind and good person. Cayenne replied that he wasn't as good as she thought, but of all the people she's ever met, he's the kindest. Etisha doesn't think she'll ever meet another person like him. The girl suggested they go shopping, as there was so much to choose from. Every merchant was calling out to her, shouting that their store had cheaper goods. Etisha finally understood what it was like to be without a servant. Cayenne apologized for causing her inconvenience, to which the girl replied that she was currently enjoying the walk. The Duke was surprised by this. Miss added that she had always wanted to experience something like this at least once. For example, walking down an unknown street to an unknown store and buying things you've never seen before. Suddenly, Cayenne of Wintel stopped. Etisha asked what had happened. The guy pointed toward the nearest store and asked if she wanted to go in. She was beside herself with joy. The Duke said that she had been interested in the shop from the very beginning. He offered to look inside if she wanted. The girl was very embarrassed. Did he really notice? Cayenne added that she also seems to enjoy sweets. Etisha said it wasn't just that. Larian likes sweets, so they often went to such shops. However, her parents never bought her anything. The girl became sad. The man walked towards the store and opened the door for her, inviting her in. Without thinking twice, Etisha walked in. She couldn't even dream of such a thing. The salesman greeted them and asked if they were interested in looking at anything in particular. Etisha was absolutely delighted with such a huge display. Duke Cayenne asked if she liked anything here. The girl asked to wait a little because there was so much here, and her eyes were running wild. She remembers her father asking her if she still wanted to buy anything. The man told her to ask her sister for some. 1 bucket would be enough, so she shouldn't be stingy. Etisha then looked at Larian and asked if she would share with her. My sister started yelling that it was all hers, that she chose them, and that Etisha should buy them herself. Suddenly, Madame Dorothea intervened. She asked Etisha if she really intended to take the candy away from her dear Larian. She should be grateful to her father. The girl began to protest, but her stepmother said that since she was being rude to her, she wouldn't get any sweets. Etisha asked the seller to show her the ones she pointed to. She also asked to see the one in front of them, and the baby rabbit. The Duke finally realized it was a rabbit. The saleswoman replied that it was her choice. Etisha also wanted what she wanted. It seemed like the childhood she'd lost was coming back to her. The girl also asked if they had any sweets that were prepared only during the banquet, in honor of the founding. The seller responded by asking if she was talking about the golden candies, and added that they were still in stock. Etisha was delighted, and said that then she would take them too. The Duke thought for a moment. He remembered that she had recently told him that he was very kind and sweet. Previously, he lived exclusively for himself and the achievement of his goals. He didn't care about his surroundings, and didn't show useless emotions to anyone. He trampled and stepped over every obstacle in his path, and he is a sweet and kind person? Etisha is so happy because of some candy. If someone has given her a little help, she already considers them a good person. However, the man closed his eyes. Etisha L. noticed that something was wrong. The girl asked if everything was okay. He responded by asking if she had finished choosing. Etisha was very embarrassed and replied that she did. She asked if she had taken too much. The Duke replied that if the opportunity arose, they would come back here again. He put a bag of coins on the table and said that no change was needed. The seller was shocked when he opened the bag. He thanked his valued customers and told them to come back again. Etisha was so happy with her purchases. She hugged her chocolate bunny tightly. The two of them were walking along the crowded streets in the evening. The girl asked the Duke to stop. The man looked questioningly. Etisha told him to take the golden candies. They say that if you put them in your mouth and make a wish, it will come true. Her wish was to leave the Heinz family, so now she has nothing to wish for. She thinks he should try these golden candies. The Duke said he didn't need it, and told her to eat them herself. The girl was afraid that she was behaving too childishly and apologized for it. The Duke replied that he simply didn't like sweets. Etisha was about to reply, but a voice interrupted her. The woman told Etisha that she felt like she had a wish she wanted to make. She added that the young lady would soon have a long journey ahead of her, and she also seemed to be from out of town. Etisha couldn't understand how she knew all this. The old woman said she worked as a fortune teller at the restaurant. If they ate there, she would tell their fortunes. She asked if they were interested in learning their fate. The Duke remained silent. Etisha invited them to dinner at a restaurant. The man replied, "Whatever you wish." They went into a restaurant, and the Duke said he would have me. Etisha added that she would have the same. The old woman placed her magic ball on the table and began fortune-telling. She began with the fate of a young lady. By destroying the unbreakable, she sees a bright future. Happiness, bliss. Difficulties await her ahead, which must be overcome. And as soon as this happens, she will find her happiness. The girl was glad to hear this. And now the old woman wants to look at the future of this nobleman. Suddenly, something terrible happened. The ball suddenly began emitting strange lightning bolts. One of them hit the old lady right in the eye. She screamed at the whole restaurant. Impenetrable darkness and pain, an endless war, struggle, revenge, loneliness, and a sword piercing the sun and the sky. Suddenly, the ball fell to the floor and rolled. The clairvoyant doubled over in pain. Atisha asked if she was okay. The woman replied that it was a horrific fate. She asked her to forgive her and ran out of the restaurant, away from them. Atisha was curious what it saw that made it run away so quickly. Kayan said that he didn't think it was a real prophecy and that she shouldn't worry about it. It's nothing more than a play on words. Anyone can do it. He asked her to look at the ball. This is the kind of ball that scammers use. Atisha was very surprised by this. The man added that a real fortune teller wouldn't work in such a place. He suggested they finish their meal and leave. The girl felt a little uneasy. It seemed like it was all a lie, but hadn't she said good things about her fate? Does Kayan have secrets from her? Will he share them with her? Duke of the North, a war hero, and a man who abandoned his mistress to save his future wife. All she knows about him are rumors and obscure facts. Now she realizes she knows nothing about Kayan. What kind of person he is. What was his life like before her? What he thinks about? What he desires? Atisha wants to know everything. The girl wanted to begin her meal, so she began to pray. It seemed to her that all her wishes had been fulfilled. She thought she'd just have to wait until the day she died, but the longer she was around him, the more she wanted to know about him. The girl decided to take one of the candies from the basket, and then Kayan asked her, "Didn't Atisha say she had no more wishes?" The girl smiled awkwardly, unwrapping the candy. Miss replied that she thinks it still remains. Is that strange? The Duke exhaled and said no, not at all. The girl's cheeks flushed. Atisha put that same golden candy in her mouth and thought that it was very tasty. Sweeter than she thought. The girl asked her to fulfill her wish. The next day, Atisha and Duke Kayan arrived at the portal that would send them north. They stood on it, and Atisha said she hoped they wouldn't worry. Kayan replied that she shouldn't worry. He'd contacted them. They'd be met. Atisha closed her eyes from the bright flash of light, and suddenly, they were standing in the middle of the snowy mountains. The girl couldn't believe that she was standing in the middle of such beauty. Cold and beautiful. This is Duke Wintel's land. Now that Heinz has left the mansion, it feels alive again. No one will torture Atisha here. Not Larianne, not her parents. She no longer needs to return to the house she tried so hard to escape from. The man called Lady Atisha and said that it was cold here and asked her to come to him. The guy paused for a second. He remembered how yesterday she had been so sincerely happy about the chocolate bunny. Now she is also sincerely and childishly happy, either because she is in the north or because she is far from the Heinz house. Behind him, the Duke heard the voice of his assistant, Val de Prame. The man turned and saw Judith running towards him, telling him that he was late and how she had been waiting for him. She suggested that they go to the mansion quickly. Preparations for the banquet were complete. Kayan pushed her away from him and asked what banquet they were talking about. The girl informed him that the mistress had planned a banquet. She had taken charge of it after hearing the news of his marriage. The man asked if they were talking about his mother. Dith added that the guests would be arriving soon. Atisha L. looked at them from the side and did not believe that she felt jealousy, but she soon convinced herself that she had no reason to be jealous. True, the Duke has Dith. It's all right. She was just a fake duchess to begin with. She's happy she was able to walk this path with him. It must be nice to know he's welcomed here. Is it normal for her to be jealous of Judith? That's why Atisha doesn't regret her wish. Duke Kayan brought her out of her reverie. The man called her name, and the girl turned to him. The Duke said he heard his mother was hosting a banquet today. Atisha asked again. The guy replied that they had originally had a day to prepare for it, but they arrived late, and there was almost no time left. He added that Atisha should also be present at the banquet, and asked if she didn't mind. The girl looked down and said that she would be there. She thought about how she would soon disappear. The only ones left here are the Duke and Dith. Atisha should be grateful to Dith. If the Duke hadn't had to look for the fake duchess, she would have remained at the Heinz estate. The girl stated that she would attend the banquet as the one who would become the Duchess of Wintel. Val de Prame told the Duke that they needed to go to the banquet as soon as possible. Kayan of Wintel said that was fine and asked if anything had happened while he was away. The assistant replied that he had carried out all his instructions. The Duke ordered him to come to him when the banquet was over. He had a special task for him. Val de declined and said that he would do as he pleased. The Duke followed the carriage. Atisha was already looking forward to seeing the Wintel's estate. The carriage moved off. They traveled along a road through a dense, snow-covered forest. Atisha, looking out the window, thought that the view from the window was very beautiful. She turned to the Duke and asked what kind of mountain it was. Cayenne didn't understand what she meant. The man looked out the window, and the girl pointed to a huge mountain. Cayenne of Wintel replied that she would understand when they arrived there. The girl looked more closely and was very surprised. It turned out it wasn't a mountain, but the Wintel's estate. The carriage arrived at the castle. The Duke opened the door and offered his hand to Lady Atisha. The girl offered him her hand in return. But it wasn't Atisha, but Judith. She thanked Duke Cayenne. The man abruptly pulled his hand away and rudely called her by her full name. The girl blushed slightly. She said she had to go. The lady told her she had bought her a new dress. The girl noticed that her mistress took good care of her. Sometimes she even gave her gifts. She approached Baroness Atisha and said that they would see each other at the party. Atisha blushed a little at her words and began to get out of the carriage. She asked the Duke if Dith was also invited to the banquet. The man replied that his mother had given Dith special permission. Atisha was sad, a mother who cares for her son's mistress like an azalea. Well, the Duke said that Dith is Wintel's weakness. She still doesn't understand him. They walked to his estate, and Cayenne turned to her to say something. The man said he'd pick her up before the banquet. Atisha said fine. The servants offered to take her to her room. She followed. The girl thought that no matter how she looked at it, this was strange. The banquet shouldn't have happened so suddenly. Even when Larian threw a small party, preparations took at least a week. Atisha suddenly realized maybe it was all because her son had brought home a bride and announced the wedding right away. The girl thought the mistress was probably angry. She had arranged the impromptu banquet, wishing to express her concern. Atisha L. is a lady with no name in high society and a son who has such accomplishments. He is going to marry someone whose identity is unknown. She probably wants to find out what kind of person Atisha is at the banquet. The girl had never been to this kind of event before. She suddenly imagined Larian, who was telling her to let her tell her about high society. Atisha exhaled. There was no way she could screw up the banquet. At the event, guests whispered about Atisha Heinz, the lady who would become the Duchess of Wintel. They had never heard of her before. The guests informed each other that the girl was no longer Heinz. She was now a baroness. They had heard that this title had been bestowed by the emperor. And how can a baroness become the Duke's wife? It's all very strange. The Duke doesn't often come to the capital. 3 years ago, he went to war. The guests don't think his meeting with the baroness was a coincidence. The guests really wanted to know the whole story and were wondering who could tell them. Countess Monmad apologized to Madame Cyrillez and said that she must know much more than they did. Cyrillez was the former duchess. Before her marriage, her name was well known in the capital's high society. After her wedding, she became the ruler of the North. In other words, she is the queen of Northern high society. The lady leaned over and told the countess that she did not quite understand what she was talking about. The guests continued to have fun and dance. Monmad became nervous. Madame Cyrillez thinks they're all mistaken. Today's banquet is dedicated to the Duke's marriage. They wanted to share this happiness with them, so they arranged a banquet. Cyrillez hopes that no one will fuss over rumors during the holiday. Suddenly, it was announced that the Duke of Cayenne and Baroness Atisha L. had arrived for the celebration. The guests dispersed to make way for Madame Cyrillez. Cayenne of Wintel bowed his head and asked his mother how she was. Atisha bowed, introduced herself, and said she was glad to meet her. Mrs. Cyrillez looked at her with disdain, and Atisha thought she seemed furious. The girl glanced at the Duke out of the corner of her eye, but he stood calmly, smiling slightly. She mentally asked the Duke if everything was all right, but then the lady approached her. She greeted her and said that she had heard that Atisha was going to marry her son. Atisha smiled and said that the Duke had accepted her marriage proposal. Mrs. Cyrillez did not understand what the marriage proposal meant. The girl explained that she was the one who proposed marriage first, and the Duke agreed. The Queen immediately said angrily that this was simply unbelievable. Atisha realized she had said something wrong. She turned to look at the Duke's face at that moment. He remained smiling just as much. The girl didn't understand why he was smiling. Maybe the Queen would trust her and let her stay? The girl forced herself to think about what to do. Atisha clenched her fists tightly. She knew she had to prove herself. A celebrity always attracts attention, and the words she speaks will reach everyone's ears. Atisha L. offered her hand to the lady and asked if she had the honor of inviting her to the first dance. Usually, the partner for the first dance is chosen by someone from the family, and for the second, by the beloved. Inviting her to the first dance shows that she wants to be part of her family. Even if Atisha is rejected, she will still be able to dance with the Duke. If she dances with him, she will be able to attract attention, to such an extent that no one will be interested in his mistress. The lady replied to the Baroness that this was a stunning proposal. Atisha L. thought she'd say that. Cyrillez kept thinking about asking for her first dance. But then, unexpectedly, Judith entered the hall and all attention fell on her. The guests began to gossip that this girl could be the very same mistress of Duke Cayenne. People didn't understand why she was there. They thought someone had probably invited her. Dith approached Miss Cyrillez and thanked her for inviting her. The queen replied that she was pleased to see Judith at the banquet. Atisha was thinking that she had been invited by none other than Madame Cyrillez. She did not accept the Baroness's offer to dance, but immediately decided to greet her mistress. Grandpa was upset because it was supposed to be a celebration in honor of the marriage. The Duke helped her sever all ties with the Heinz family, and in return, she was to become a false duchess. That was their deal, but now the lady greeted Judith in front of everyone. This means she can be close to the Duke, the perfect plan. Does he really need a fake duchess? Now everyone looks at her, as if she were a lonely island at sea, a distant island that no one would even think of setting foot on. Her role ends here. If only she knew it would end this way. But she was stupid. She hoped that some candy could make her wish come true. Atisha felt pain, bitterness, and discomfort. Suddenly, the Duke turned to her mother. The man said that she had invited Judith thoughtlessly and that it had not occurred to her that Atisha would be unpleasant. Cayenne added that she should explain herself to the guests. The lady replied that she couldn't afford it. Duke Cayenne asked her once again to clarify this misunderstanding. Atisha was surprised that the Duke stood up for her. She looked at him, and in response, the Duke only hugged her tighter. The guests continued to wait to see what would happen next. The lady nevertheless replied that it seemed it was still worth explaining. She raised this child as her own. Even though she's a commoner, she sees Dith as her daughter, and that's why she's here. Atisha L. was shocked and didn't understand what it all meant. Cyrillez continued her story. When she learned that Cayenne had decided to get married, she felt it necessary to invite Dith to this banquet. Cayenne is her son, and Judith is her adopted daughter. It's fitting that the family gathers together on such a beautiful day. The public was shocked. They believed Judith was Cayenne's lover, not her sister. She then moved on to Baroness Atisha, who apologized for any discomfort this might have caused her. Ms. Cyrillez quietly added that she was happy to learn of Cayenne's marriage. Atisha couldn't believe it. The woman said she couldn't sleep, so she suddenly threw this banquet. Besides, Cayenne arrived here a day later than planned. She was very worried. Finally, the lady added that she was sorry. She had acted without thinking it through properly. Cyrillez extended her hand to Atisha L., inviting her to dance. The girl was glad that the lady was not angry with her after all. Mrs. Cyrillez admitted that she was sincerely grateful for her desire to marry her son. She'll be happy to dance more than one dance. The girls walked to the center of the room. The guests had no idea it would all turn out this way. The Duke's mistress, it turns out, is Madame Cyrillez's adopted daughter. Clearly, they shouldn't interfere. Ms. Cyrillez and Atisha L. began to dance the first dance at the banquet. The woman asked the Baroness to take care of her only son. She will do everything possible to help them with the wedding ceremony, so Atisha can ask her for anything. The girl thanked her and said that she would definitely contact her. Cyrillez was embarrassed by the girl calling her mistress. She told her she could call her mother. She wouldn't mind. Atisha was very surprised by this. The mistress asked her not to think anything bad. She wasn't forcing her at all. She waited a long time for Cayenne to find a worthy girlfriend and get married. The woman tried her best to find him a suitable bride, but Mother laid out on the table 5 photographs of girls who were contenders for the Duke's heart. She told the Duke that they were all good. The lady began to tell him about the first girl, but was refused. The woman was very upset because he didn't even look at them. Duke Cayenne turned around and said that he had business to attend to and left the room. Cyrillez lowered her head and said that she just hoped that Cayenne would find someone he could feel at ease with. The lady took Miss Atisha L. by the hands and looked straight into her eyes. The woman admitted that she wanted to be that person for Cayenne, the one who would be his support for the rest of his life. Atisha hoped that would be the case. It was time for Atisha and Duke Cayenne's second dance. The man approached her. The Duke said that he thought so, that his mother was just shy. He added that she was even happier about his marriage to Atisha than he was. The man bowed and offered his hand to the Baroness. The girl became embarrassed. The second dance always goes to your beloved. They began their dance. Atisha told the Duke she was surprised. She thought his mother was strict. She didn't think she would be treated well. The Duke replied that this only worked within the family. Atisha realized that the reason why Mrs. Cyrilese treated her so well was because she would become her son's bride. But if it turns out that the marriage was a sham, the lady will not tolerate lies. Atisha L. closed her eyes tightly and told herself that this should not happen. The couple finished their dance, and Atisha took a small bow to the audience. Rumors quickly spread among the guests about the commoner who had been taken in and raised by Madame Cyrilese. They discussed what Madame had said, that she had taken her in. Judith was not a pet, after all. People noticed her beautiful hair and said that they, too, would like to raise a commoner like her. But it was clear what would happen next if you let such a person under your wing. One woman said she didn't know what she was doing, but she was clearly causing nothing but trouble for the Duke of Cayenne. Rumor had it she was his mistress. They won't know the truth. Maybe she tricked the Duke and became his mistress. The girl stood there in tears. Miss Monmouth approached her and asked what had happened. All she heard in response was the Duke's name. When Dith turned 12, she became the adopted daughter of Mrs. Cyrilese. Since then, she grew up in the castle with Cayenne, like brother and sister. Duke Cayenne was educated like a nobleman, but Judith couldn't be near him, as she wasn't from a noble family. They were so-called brother and sister with Cayenne, but while the boy became the ruler of the north, Dith continued to sit locked up in the castle. Cayenne's heart was like a cold wasteland. No one could warm it. Previously, he was not interested in relationships with any of the girls. And then Judith thought that it meant that the only girl next to him would be her. She used to think so, but now everything has changed. When this Atisha appeared, Mrs. Cyrilese invited her to the banquet. She felt the time had come to announce to the people that she and Cayenne had sworn to be brother and sister. But the first dance at the celebration, and even the second, did not become her star dance. Monmad told her to look, but Judith continued to stand motionless. Tears were about to roll down her face. She kept thinking about how long she'd been with Cayenne. Monmad found it funny that the commoner was ignoring her words. After Mrs. Monmad received no answer, she began to shout that this was impudence and asked if Dith had gone deaf. She unfurled her fan and slammed it into Judith's face with all her might. The girl screamed at her, asking how dare she ignore her. Did she really think she could call herself a duke's daughter? Dith clutched her burning cheek and still didn't understand why she had been hit. She started calling for Cayenne and Mrs. Cyrilese, but Monmad had already swung at her, shouting that it was a shame and a disgrace. She ordered her to kneel down and ask for her forgiveness right now. Suddenly, a man stood in front of Judith, covering the girl with his body. He asked her to calm down, saying that today was such a wonderful day. They were at Vintel Castle, at a banquet celebrating the Duke's wedding. He asked if she really intended to beat up Lady Cyrilese's adopted daughter on such a day. The girl couldn't believe that Judith was defending Marquis Hexion. Even Judith couldn't believe it. The man said Monmad shouldn't bother punishing her. He'd handle it himself. Mrs. Monmad didn't even know what to answer, so she simply remained silent. Hexion leaned closer to her and said that he was worried that Lady Monmad would ruin her beautiful fan. Hexion grabbed Judith by the arm and forcibly pulled her down the castle corridor. The girl had no idea what was happening. Suddenly, the Marquis stopped. He turned to her and told her that she should go back. Dith froze, not understanding what he meant. She looked at him closely and thought he seemed very handsome. Those blood-red eyes and ash-blonde hair. If Duke Cayenne looks like he stepped out of a fairy tale, that Marquis Hexion is like a demon who seduces people. Judith asked again. The man replied that there was a place where she was welcome. She replied that Mrs. Cyrilese had invited her. It was the first banquet in her life. Hexion took her chin and asked what was up with her expression at the Duke's wedding celebration. He added that she looked pathetic. She didn't answer when called. The girl abruptly removed the Marquis's hand and shouted that she already knew it. Hexion said that he did not know why the lady invited her to the banquet. The Marquis added that, sad as it was, someone like her could not stay here. The girl asked all this because she was a commoner, and in response, Hexion laughed loudly. Miss Judith asked him what was making him laugh so much. Hexion replied that she wasn't prepared for anything. If she is Mrs. Cyrilese's adopted daughter, then she should behave accordingly. And if she is Cayenne's lover, you must play your role. The man told her she wouldn't be able to stand it. He asked if she had seen the elite at the banquet. That's what a battlefield is. So she better get back. Dith started screaming for him to tell her how to become Cayenne's favorite, how to become a duchess. Meanwhile, at the banquet, Atisha L. met new ladies. One miss welcomed Atisha to the northern lands and invited him to come to their estate, when the time was right. Another girl invited her to a tea party. Atisha thanked her and said she would definitely come. Her face was flushed, and it looked like she'd had too much wine. As expected, it had been a difficult day. She thought that Judith was the Duke's mistress, but it turned out that she was the adopted daughter of the lady and Cayenne's sister. Royals typically don't associate much with commoners, especially important figures like the Duke. The girl understood why Duke Cayenne had said that about Judith. She remembered his words about Judith being Wintel's weakness, the existence of which must be hidden. Atisha was curious why Mrs. Cyrilleze decided to raise her. Is there anything she doesn't know? There are probably a lot of things. After the banquet, Mrs. Cyrilleze approached the Baroness and said that she had looked good today. The girl thanked her, calling her mistress. The woman had already started to say that she could call her mother, but suddenly faltered. Atisha asked again if it was true, but the lady replied that nothing had happened and asked him to pretend that nothing had happened. Miss did not expect to see the strict Mrs. Cyrilleze from her gentle side. The girl blushed and thought it was very sweet. She apologized, saying she was sorry and calling the lady Mom. Cyrilleze froze in surprise. Atisha thanked her again, but this time she called her Mother. The girl looked at the lady and thought that, looking at her, one might think that she was angry. But in reality, she was embarrassed. The girl thought it was very cute. Atisha said she was truly happy that her mother welcomed her so warmly. Cyrilleze responded that not everything was going smoothly. The banquet was organized in a hurry, and there were some shortcomings. Atisha said that she would try to be a good daughter-in-law to repay her kindness. She said that in that case, the lady could also call her by another name, not a baroness. Though she was still surprised by that title, she took her mother's hand, and the lady asked what she should call her then. Atisha replied, Daughter. My daughter. Cyrilleze looked at her sternly and with embarrassment. The lady snatched her hand from Atisha's, but immediately realized and began to ask for forgiveness. She saw Cayenne coming towards them and said that she had to go. She had so much to do. I need to get ready for the wedding, and the wedding dress, and the bride's jewelry. All of this has been in the Wintel family for generations. It all needs to be taken care of. They must organize a lavish wedding celebration that will go down in history. Cyrilleze added that it was already late and suggested discussing it over tea tomorrow. The woman was very embarrassed, but Atisha became more and more touched by this each time. At the end, she called her daughter and immediately decided to leave the room. The Duke said that a daughter-in-law appeared, and they immediately stopped paying attention to their son. Atisha calmed him down and said that his mother was very worried about him. The man looked at her carefully and added that he was going to introduce her to the castle after the banquet was over. But it seemed she had too much to drink. Atisha agreed. The Duke said that in that case, he would show her to her room. Atisha became embarrassed. The man offered Atisha his hand and invited him to come with him. Cayenne said the mansion was quite large. It was easy to get lost. He asked her not to go alone, but rather to take a maid with her. The girl replied that it was good and noted that she still had so much to learn. Duke Cayenne explained that they were now in the main building, the very heart of the Winter Palace. To the east and west are small wings. They are called the Snow Palace and the Dark Palace. The girl was surprised by such a strange name for the parts of this palace. Cayenne said his parents lived in the snowy one. Atisha guessed that Judith lived in the dark one. The man replied that the dark section was currently empty. The Wintel's heir would live there. Judith lives in a tower outside the castle. It's called the Star Tower. Duke Cayenne said that Atisha's bedroom is on the 3rd floor of the main palace. The entire floor was hers. She could explore it freely. Atisha couldn't believe what she was hearing. Cayenne said that, to put it correctly, this is the Duke and Duchess's floor. They came to a huge door, and Duke Cayenne told them that this was her bedroom. Atisha was very surprised that there was only one entrance to the bedroom. In the capital, her room was opposite the Duke's. Is it further divided? Or did they really share a bedroom? The girl was afraid to find out the answer. The Duke said that since he had already shown it, he would retire to his office. He still needed to review the reports on what had happened in the northern lands during his absence. The man wished them a good rest and departed. The girl was left alone with an unanswered question that still needs to be answered. Meanwhile, Judith brought Hexion to the Star Tower where she lives. She invited him, and the Marquis asked if he could definitely be there. The girl looked down and said that there was no one else here. He laughed and said it looked like Miss Cyrilleze had raised her in a hothouse. If she wants to look like a socialite, she shouldn't behave like this. Hexion added that she did not receive the education due to the nobility, although she uses things of the highest quality. The man wanted to touch her things, but Dith cried out that they had been given to her by Mrs. Cyrillez and told him not to treat them so carelessly. He looked at her dress and asked if the lady had given it to her too. Miss Judith smiled and said, "Yes, this dress is gorgeous." Marquis Hexion replied that, as expected, she knew nothing. Dith cried out what he meant. The man asked if she had ever heard the story of the imperial canary. The girl looked questioningly. The marquise began to tell the story. One day, the first emperor found a bird with golden plumage in the mountains. The emperor immediately fell in love with the canary and began to take care of her. He gave her a name, fed her, and cared for her like the apple of his eye. The girl asked what he was getting at. The man asked Judith not to interrupt and to listen to what would happen next. Since the emperor treasured the canary, he treated it with special care. The servants were careful and attentive, fearing that something would happen to her. The bird grew more and more beautiful, but one day, something terrible happened. The emperor suddenly wanted to see her soar through the sky, so he released her from her cage. But no, she couldn't spread her wings and only chirped. Why? Hexion said it was because she was kept in a cage and cared for so carefully. Her legs became weak, and her vision deteriorated significantly. The hawk has turned into a canary, which can only chirp. Judith turned and asked if he was implying that she looked like that canary. The man said she was perceptive. She was lucky that Ms. Cyrillez noticed her, and because of this, she turned into a bird, imprisoned in a luxurious cage. The girl cried out that it was all a lie. The mistress saw her as a daughter. The man asked, "Really? Did they treat her and her pet dog any differently at the banquet?" The girl replied that those ladies were simply evil. The marquis said that, in the end, their attitude toward her had inadvertently revealed the whole truth. He means that he is in a pathetic and ridiculous position. Dith lowered her head, remembering all the pleasant moments associated with Ms. Cyrillez. The girl thought about the very cage in which she was now located. Perhaps Marquis Hexion was right in his guess, and she was just the emperor's canary. The man said that perhaps Mrs. Cyrillez raised her out of simple curiosity, pity, or simply generosity. It doesn't matter. What's more important is that the girl is treated like her pet. Therefore, if she wants to escape from this terrible reality, she must listen to his advice. At the same time, Duke Cayenne came into his and Atisha's room and took off his jacket. The man looked at the sleeping Atisha and even felt a little touched. He took off his t-shirt and sat down next to Atisha. Cayenne looked at her sleeping face and thought, Atisha was able to gain the power to crush those who hurt her. The Duke took her dress and lifted it a little to see her legs. He asked her why she didn't take revenge on the Heinz family. All the Duke's suffering was born from deep darkness. His happy childhood vanished without him even noticing. Cayenne of Wintel had to come to terms with a sudden misfortune. He wanted to escape this terrible reality. He didn't want to be a part of it. He must live, and for everything to work out, he must break ties with the past. He must take revenge on the people who brought him suffering, cut off their heads, burn their bodies, trample their ashes. He must exact merciless revenge. Atisha is a girl who, like him, wants to cut all ties with the past. But unlike him, she didn't seek revenge. The Duke was tormented by the question of why. Isn't she furious? Is it fair? Doesn't she want to kill them all? Atisha felt the Duke's touch and opened her eyes. She didn't understand what was happening. Cayenne let go of her dress, without saying that everything was fine and that she should lie back down. He thought that nothing had changed. The wedding had to take place in a month because everything will go as he planned before. The next morning, Miss Cyrillez and Miss Atisha were having tea. The woman asked if her dress was torn. Atisha replied that yes, it seemed she had torn it in her sleep. Her mother told her not to worry, she would buy another one. The girl didn't know when she managed to tear it. As usual, she dreamed of the Duke. Mrs. Cyrillez added that, by the way, it was she who handed the letter to the girl. Atisha asked what it was, and Cyrillez replied that it was an invitation to tea from Marquis Hexion. He had invited her, Atisha, and Dith. At yesterday's banquet, Marquis Hexion spoke with Lady Monmad and Dith. Despite this, Marquis Hexion is involved in various scandalous rumors. That's why she's worried about Dith getting into trouble. Atisha thought that the lady truly cared about her adopted daughter. She thought how great it would be if she had such caring parents. They would share pleasant things with her and worry about her if something happened. The girl was envious. Suddenly, she heard her mother-in-law's voice in her dreams. She asked what it was, and the lady said that she would accept the invitation in any case. The woman asked what about her. Would she go with them? The girl thought about it. She said it was an honor, but she was not yet accustomed to the banquets held in the north. Many rumors make her nervous. Atisha smiled and said that next time she'll go with them. The woman was very embarrassed by her smile and asked her not to smile at her like that. After tea, Etisha looked around her new home with its 2 servants. She thought that, frankly speaking, the lady was also charming. The girl walked into the library and was delighted by how huge it was. Etisha L saw a door at the end of the hall and wondered where it led. One of the maids said that this was the Duke's office and he should be there now. Suddenly, these doors opened and the assistant of the Duke of Val-de-Prame came out. The man greeted Miss Etisha. He told her to come in and that the Duke was waiting for her. The girl asked again. He asked if she hadn't come here because of the gift. Etisha was not embarrassed when she heard that the Duke had prepared a gift for her. When she entered the office, she saw a lot of magnificent jewelry. The girl forced herself upon seeing one set of them. Cayenne asked if she liked it. Etisha replied that she didn't need all that expensive jewelry. Cayenne said it was an apology and added that she shouldn't be burdened. The girl asked what kind of apology he was talking about. He had nothing to apologize for. The Duke replied that the dress was torn. Etisha blushed and said it was her fault. But suddenly, the man says that he tore it apart. The girl froze, not believing what she heard. She looked at him in surprise, and Cayenne replied that he had torn her dress last night. The Baroness was so shocked by what she heard that she didn't notice how she dropped the necklace. Miss Etisha turned red and covered her mouth with her hands in shame. The maids who heard this and Val-de-Prame's assistant were stunned. They imagined Duke Cayenne ripping Miss Etisha's dress in a fit of passion. The girl still couldn't believe the Duke had torn her dress. The man himself, unlike the others, showed no emotion. Etisha recalled what had happened that night. She was lying on the Duke's arm, and he touched her with his other hand. A moment later, the girl was already lying in the Duke's arms. She thought she had dreamed it. Cayenne apologized again and said it was his fault. He had misjudged his strength. Etisha replied that everything was fine and that this could happen to anyone. The man said he had invited the designer. He couldn't help but keep his word. He wants to make amends with these gifts. The Duke asked him to accept them. Etisha told me to keep my cool because people were looking at me now. They might get suspicious if she continues to pull away from him. Duke Cayenne was showing everyone their close relationship. The girl didn't know if it was true about the torn dress. Etisha picked up the first jewelry box she liked and opened it. The girl was very surprised because inside it lay the heart of an angel, a beautiful necklace, an ornament that she only saw in the fairy tales she read as a child. One day, a pink diamond fell from the sky. Upon hearing this news, the crown prince fashioned 7 pieces of jewelry from it. He gave each of them to his bride throughout the week. She burst into tears of joy upon receiving such gifts, filled with the crown prince's love. Then they married and lived happily ever after. Etisha couldn't believe that she now had such an extraordinary jewel in her hands. The Duke said she seemed to know what it was. It was made from an angel's heart, the very first of the 7. The girl said this necklace was too expensive for her. The man asked what she was talking about. It's nonsense. It's just a stone anyway. Etisha thought it was a very expensive stone. The Duke chose it because he thought it would suit Etisha. The man took out a necklace and asked Lady Etisha to hold her hair. The girl put her hair back, and the Duke put this beauty on her and fastened it. Cayenne looked and said that, as expected, it suits her very well. In her mind, Etisha was happy because she had a new trinket from the Duke on her neck and a necklace from the Emperor under her dress. The man asked if she wanted to look at the other gifts. She replied that she didn't want to. The Duke still had so much to do. She dared not detain him any longer. Etisha touched her new piece of jewelry and said she would take care of it. Cayenne replied that it was fine and added that he would send the rest to her wardrobe. The girl thanked him and wished him a good day. She left the office. The maids couldn't believe the Duke had given Miss Etisha an angel's heart. He even smiled a little. And last night he tore her dress. Is this the Duke they knew before? Baroness Etisha L suddenly became the Duke of Wintel's fiancée, and the most interesting topic of conversation in society. The maids were discussing among themselves that the Duke had torn her dress and were saying how passionate he was. Rumors spread quickly about the Duke giving her an angel's heart and about Lady Cyrillès inviting her to tea. There was only 1 day left until tea. Other people wait years for an invitation to Lady Cyrillès's tea party. One of the maids asked why everyone was so surprised. She lied, claiming to know Lady Etisha was a famous figure in the capital. Land, an estate, gifts from the Emperor. She asked if they now understood that Etisha L was different from the others. And so Etisha's importance grew with each passing day, unbeknownst to her, of course. That evening, in the Star Tower, Judith learned of these rumors. She bit her nails and thought, had Cayenne really torn her dress? She thought it impossible. This simply can't be happening. Dith was furious. She pulled out her chair and sat down on it. The girl began to write a letter to the Marquis of Hexion, who promised to help her. A couple of days later, Hexion thanked them for accepting his invitation. Knowing they were all very busy, he told the girls that he hoped they would have a great time and enjoy themselves. Mrs. Monmad calmly drank tea and looked at Judith. She couldn't understand what Marquis Hexion was thinking when he invited a commoner here. If it weren't for Lady Cyrillez, she would have thrown her out of here long ago. The man observed Judith's behavior in society and came to the conclusion that she was different from others. The conversation took place a couple of days ago. Then Marquis Hexion told the girl a month. She only has 1 month. Miss Judith didn't understand and asked what he meant. The Marquis smiled in response. He asked if he understood correctly that their wedding would take place in a month. In the eyes of the aristocrats, Deeth is now the daughter of a duchess and the mistress of a duke. But what will happen if an official owner of the Wintle family appears? Everyone will forget about her. If those two get married, it will be the end for her. The girl clenched her fists tightly and asked what she needed to do. Hexion replied that she had a month. During that month, she needed to strengthen her position. Judith must not allow any of the Wintels or aristocrats to treat her inappropriately. The Marquis added that for this she needed allies, and that was all for today. Finally, Hexion advised her to start with Countess Monmad. It was during the tea party that Judith decided to take action. She stood up from the table and wanted to say something to Mrs. Cyrillez. But unexpectedly, the girl accidentally knocked over a cup of hot tea. All this tea, of course, spilled all over Countess Monmad. The woman was furious. Hot tea dripped down the fabric of her expensive dress. Judith began to apologize and say it was an accident. The Countess asked how this could be an accident. Everyone could see it was on purpose. The woman came closer and said that even if it was a mistake, she had spilled water on the Countess and should be punished. The girl apologized again and said that she really didn't mean it. She took a napkin and asked to let her help wipe it away. But Monmad slapped her hand and told her not to touch it. Who was she to touch her with her filthy hands? The other invited ladies didn't want to get involved in their quarrel. Suddenly, Madame Cyrillez told the Countess that she was being too rude. The woman wiped her mouth with a napkin and said that she had brought a clean child with her. There was silence in the room, but then Monmad screamed that Judith had deliberately spilled tea on her. It was obvious she had harbored a grudge against her after the banquet. Cyrillez began to remember. The woman said that, at the banquet, an arrogant lady hit Deeth in the face, her adopted daughter. But at the banquet she hosted, where Judith was first introduced to society, Cyrillez said it was interesting and asked Madame Monmad if she happened to know this reckless lady. Monmad bit her lip. She said she didn't know what had happened at the banquet, but if the Duchess could let go of her anger, the troubles of that day would subside on their own. Mrs. Cyrillez said that this was great advice, and she thought so too. The woman stood up and said that, of course, the noble Madame Monmad was so well versed in propriety and laws, and she will be lenient with the mistakes of her child, who still knows little. Monmad replied, "Of course." Later, she walked down the corridor and thought about what this toad had enlisted the support of Madame Cyrillez. Marquis Hexion approached her and said that the dress suited her very well. He apologizes to her on his own behalf for today's incident. After all, the law of nobility dictates, do not disdain injustice, but he cannot speak out against it due to certain circumstances. He has no reason to meet the Countess. The girl blushed and said that he didn't need to apologize for that. She hopes he'll be more considerate in the future. She doesn't want to see commoners here. Hexion said it was unexpected. He thought she would need this child more than anyone else. Countess Monmad asked him what he meant. The man replied that with the wedding of the Duke of Cayenne, a new duchess would appear in society. Madame Cyrillez will soon leave high society, but Baroness Etisha L., whose name was formerly Etisha Hines. The woman interrupted and said that she had heard about her and that Etisha L. seemed to be quite a shameless girl. Hexion asked if she would be worthy of becoming the top of high society. Monmad asked if this meant that she should sit on this throne. The man replied that he thought she was more deserving. If not her, then who could succeed Madame Cyrillez? He then asked her to use Judith, whom she considers a commoner. Judith is a means of shaking the greatness of Duke Wintel, who stands firm as a mountain. Hexion said she simply had to take advantage of this opportunity. At night in the castle, Etisha L. decided to walk around it in her nightgown. She walked and thought whether Cayenne would sleep with her today, like yesterday. The girl wondered why he'd torn her dress. Looking back, he can be very stern at times. She wondered if he really had such preferences, and then dismissed the thought. She apologized to the Duke for such vulgar thoughts. Suddenly, Etisha looked at the wall. The girl realized that these were all portraits of Wintel's. She began to examine them. Atisha reached the very end and finally saw the portrait of Duke Kayen. The girl said he was cute and saw that his birthday was on it. 1 year of Barus, 5 of the gods, the 7th star. Atisha was horrified that it was tomorrow. Suddenly, she heard the Duke's voice behind her. He asked her what she was doing there. The girl didn't know what to do. She couldn't say she didn't know it was his birthday. Atisha L. said she was just walking around looking at the portraits and got a little lost. The Baroness looked at the wall and noticed something strange. One of the portraits was missing. The girl began to think why it was empty, as if someone had been removed. When she looks at them shoulder to shoulder, it becomes uncomfortable. Duke Kayen asked where her maids were. The girl hesitated. She said she was only going out for a minute, so she didn't take them with her. The man said that she was very pale and asked her to go back to the room and rest. He would call the doctor. The girl replied that she didn't need a doctor. Kayen asked if something was bothering her. She blushed and said that, frankly speaking, she wanted to apologize. She didn't know that it was his birthday tomorrow and that he would probably be holding a reception. The Duke replied that they were not holding celebrations in honor of his birthday. Atisha was very surprised by this. The man explained that he hadn't been used to celebrating it since childhood, and this year it would be no different. The girl asked why. After all, it was a special day of the year. The Duke thought for a moment. He replied that it was all because he didn't want to waste his time on such complicated things. Atisha didn't quite understand what all the fuss was about. Larian went out of her way every year to throw a lavish celebration. The Duke wasn't like that. She asked if it would be possible if it weren't that difficult. The man didn't understand what she meant. The girl replied that now she knew it was his birthday tomorrow and didn't want it to be an ordinary day. She received a lot of help from him, and he gave her so many things. Therefore, she wants to pay him back with the slightest help and help with the organization. The girl added that she wasn't talking about the ball. She simply hoped the Duke would spend a little time with her. He came closer and asked if his birthday was so important to her. Atisha replied that, of course, because she won't be with him next year. The girl wondered if this was really such a burden for him. She didn't have much time left. That's why it's only now that she can celebrate his birthday. The guy said he agreed. She asked to spend time with him. Atisha L. was very happy and sincerely thanked the Duke. The next day, Atisha was riding in a carriage through the city. She looked out the window at the streets. The girl said that the houses look very neat, even from a distance, and the roads are in good condition. Headmaid Corda told her that it was because Duke Kayen ordered regular maintenance and inspection every year. Subsidies are provided to the elderly or in the event of disasters. During heavy snowfalls, snow is removed promptly before it melts and turns to ice. Atisha thought the climate in the north was harsher and the Duke was coping well. As expected, he was wonderful. The maid asked Atisha why she had decided to go for a walk. The girl became embarrassed and said she needed to buy something. The maids were curious about what she was talking about. Atisha didn't know what kind of gift the Duke would like. The girl is a little confused because it seems like he already has everything. Suddenly, the carriage stopped abruptly. The Baroness asked what was happening. The main maid, Corda, said that she would go out and see what happened. On the street, security guards shouted at a stranger, asking him how dare he block the path of Wintel's carriage. Hexion thought that people around him might think he was a murderer. The man suddenly said he just wanted to say hello. Atisha began to remember this man. She shouted for the guards to stop and got out of her carriage. Atisha asked Corda if this was really the case, but was immediately told that she was right. This is Marquis Hexion. Atisha didn't understand what the Marquis was doing on the street without an escort. The girl approached him and bowed, saying that she was glad to meet him. She introduced herself and in response heard that he knew who she was. The man said that only 3 people were allowed to ride in the carriage bearing the Wintel's family crest: Duke Kayen, Madame Cyrillez, and Baroness Atisha L. Hexion showed her 3 fingers. He added that if the odds are 1 in 3, then it's worth throwing yourself under it. Atisha asked him what he meant. The man replied that he was simply bored. He came closer to her, leaned over, and asked if she didn't remember him. Atisha didn't understand what was wrong with this man. He wasn't even sure she would be the one in the carriage. But he still blocked the road. If he hadn't been careful, he could have been trampled by the horse. The girl didn't understand what his words meant. Was he talking about the tea ceremony? Atisha asked if he was talking about the last tea ceremony. She apologized for not accepting his invitation that day. She wasn't familiar with the north yet. The man stood there looking gloomy, and the girl thought something was wrong with the atmosphere. Had she said something wrong? Hexion couldn't find the right words, but in the end, he said that it was sad that she didn't remember him. Atisha was surprised and asked if he could be confusing her with someone else. The man put his hood back on and said he thought he was mistaken. The girl thought that the tone of his voice had strangely become much sharper. He's probably angry. Heinz apologized for suddenly jumping under her carriage. He added that someone was waiting for him, so he should go now. He apologized again and left. Corda asked Lady Atisha if she knew Marcus Hexion. She replied no, this was her first meeting with him. The main thing the maid said was that it was strange. Atisha didn't understand. Could she really have known Marquis Hexion before? But if she had met someone so outstanding, she would hardly have forgotten about it. At the same time, someone sent Judith a box with a very beautiful dress. The girl tried it on and it looked amazing on her. She couldn't believe it was for her. Miss noticed a note attached to the box. The girl hoped that this gift hadn't arrived by mistake. She read the note, and it turned out to be a gift from Mrs. Manhwa. No matter how many times she read it, she still couldn't believe it. At the last tea ceremony, she said that she wanted to be friends with her. Dith had never received gifts like this before. Does this mean Madame Monmad treats her like the Duke's lady? The girl clutched the dress and thought she was very happy. The mistress always gave her flowing and simple dresses. But when she puts on this dress, she looks like the main character of a fashion party. She wondered what Qian would say when he saw her in this outfit. Will he look at her differently if he sees her so beautiful? She must go and see Duke Qian as quickly as possible. The table was already set in honor of the Duke's birthday. Atisha was already seated and waiting for him. She wondered if the Duke would like her gift. If he did, she would be very happy. Qian of Wintel entered the hall. The girl started to stand, but the Duke asked her not to. She greeted him. The man said he heard someone had come to see her. He asked if she had any problems. The girl replied that it didn't matter. It was just a minor incident. Atisha took out her gift and asked the Duke to accept it. Qian didn't understand what it was. She said it was her gift to him. Since it was a plant, he could continue to grow it. She chose him because the Duke would be able to admire him for a long time. Duke Qian didn't even know how to react to this. He touched the blue ball in the center of the flower. Suddenly, a small copy of Atisha appeared from it and wished him a happy birthday. She hoped that this year would be a happy one for him too, and thanked him for everything. Qian was very surprised by this gift. He thought that Atisha still wanted to celebrate his birthday. Even after she dies, Atisha will die. In 1 year, she will be gone. 1 year from now, she won't be able to be here anymore. She'll get sick and die. Duke Qian didn't understand why this realization made his heart clench. The girl said that she was interested in whether he liked her gift. Suddenly, Atisha L felt a piercing pain. She fell to her knees before the Duke. For a second, Qian didn't understand what was happening. He rushed towards her, grabbing her, but she fell right into his lap. Qian screamed at her to stay with him, conscious. Her gift, which she spent so long choosing, broke. Qian of Wintel kept asking Atisha if she was okay, but all he heard in response was a moan. The man thought that this was all bad and decided to quickly call a doctor. Miss touched him with her hand and said that there was no need for that. She was fine. The girl said that this was only the second symptom and that she would be fine soon. She insisted she was telling the truth and that she was better than him. Qian was a little taken aback. He asked if she was really okay. The girl replied that she was and thanked him. Atisha apologized profusely because it was her fault that his gift was broken. The man replied that everything was fine. The stone that showed the image and the water lily were intact. They simply demand a new tank. Atisha noticed that he was completely wet and that if he stayed in this one, he would definitely get sick. She took a napkin from the table and asked him to wait a minute. The girl began to wipe it. Atisha suggested using a wipe to remove moisture first. She added that she was glad he was okay. The Duke was embarrassed by his current situation. Judith saw this whole picture of intimacy by chance when she entered the room. The girl saw the ring on Atisha's finger again and froze for a second. Pora noticed her, but they still continued to stand silently, not knowing what to say. Atisha thought about what she should do now. What if Dith had seen her symptoms of extreme mana? The man grabbed Atisha by the waist and hugged her. He asked Dith what was going on. Judith couldn't answer. She continued to stand rooted to the spot. The girl smiled and said that she came to show him her outfit, because this is the first time in a while that she has worn such a fashionable dress. Dith said it was a gift from Madame Monmad to her, so she wanted to show it to Qian too. The girl was walking and didn't notice how she stepped on that very stone. A small copy of Atisha appeared from it again and began to congratulate the Duke. She said again that she hoped that next year would be as happy as this one and thanked him. Atisha looked at Judith with concern, so the man asked if everything was okay. Dith was furious. Birthday! Was she really celebrating Qian's birthday? It's simply impossible. Kayan always forgot about celebrating his birthday. He never received any holidays or other gifts. Judith told him not to be upset and that no one could have Kayan. The girl gritted her teeth and thought about how much she didn't like all of this. She could barely hold back her tears, so she decided not to run away from this room. Atisha L shouted to wait for her, but as soon as she wanted to follow her, the Duke grabbed her hand. The girl did not understand what this meant and only looked after her with alarm. That night, Judith ran through the castle and thought that she knew Kayan was better than Atisha. She thinks about Kayan much more than she does. She should be Kayan's lady. It is she who should receive care from Mrs. Cyrillez and receive gifts from Kayan. Be delightful to the servants and maids. Atisha, that's not the woman. She should have it all. The girl lay and cried into her pillow. She thought about how she should become a Kayan woman. A tear fell on her palm, and she realized that she must take Atisha's place. Marquis Hexion walked into the room, and the one who called her a canary sighed. He leaned towards her, began to stroke her, and tenderly asked why she was crying. Judith didn't quite understand what he was doing there. The girl asked him what she should do. She took his hand in hers and added that she would do anything to take her place. The man smiled and cupped her face. He told her that he congratulated the canary. She left the cage. Before going to bed, Kayan asked Atisha if she had any breathing problems. The girl replied that she was already feeling better and thanked the Duke for his concern. He asked if it was because she was pushing herself so hard when she came out. The girl replied that she hadn't. Corda and the knight had been very helpful, so she quickly returned. Atisha said that during the day, she accidentally bumped into Marquis Hexion. Suddenly, he jumped right in front of the carriage. An accident almost occurred. He seemed to know her, but for Atisha, this was the first time she had met him. The girl said she thought he was mistaking her for someone else. The Duke thought for a moment, but then replied that he should have told her something earlier, but had missed the chance. Among the world's aristocratic figures, there are two men Lady Atisha must be wary of. The first is Madame Monmad. It's no exaggeration to say that all the gossip and scandals in the north originate from her. The man told her not to get too tangled up. When speaking to her, you need to be careful what you say. And the other man was Marquis Hexion. Kayan asked her to ignore his interest in her. Atisha considered his words. The Duke told her that the Marquis was a dangerous man. He liked to play with women. The life of any woman involved with him would be ruined. Atisha replied that would never happen. The girl added that she understood and would take this into account. The Duke said that was good. He asked her to go to bed already. She needed to rest. Atisha asked when he would go to bed. Kayan replied that she shouldn't worry about him and when he went to bed. The girl closed her eyes and thought about what she was going to ask if Dith was okay. The Duke looked at her sleepily and raised his hand to stroke her. But suddenly, the man realized what he was doing and immediately removed his hand. A few days later, Atisha was drinking tea and thinking about what had happened. She was concerned that Dith had witnessed her symptoms of excessive Manny disease that day. But nothing happened in those couple of days. The girl was glad she hadn't run into Judith. Everything had become too complicated. Suddenly, Mrs. Cyrillez called her daughter-in-law and asked if she was there. The girl shouted that she was there. She gave her a piece of paper and said that it was a list of guests to whom wedding invitations would be sent. Atisha looked at him and thought, everyone here is wonderful. The list included the imperial family, members of the royal family, nobles, archmages, and high priests. Cyrillez told her that if she wanted to invite or remove anyone from the list, she should let her know now. Atisha replied that everything was fine. Her wedding is also the Wintles family wedding. The family guests Mom invited are also her guests. Mrs. Cyrillez admired her and said that her daughter-in-law's words were wonderful and that she was very thoughtful. Atisha replied that she was very kind to her and praised her too much. The lady blushed and said she'd leave the final guest list as is. The girl thought Cyrillez really was the nicest man in the empire. Cyrillez pulled out another invitation and said she made it just in case. The girl opened it and was very surprised. Cyrillez didn't know whether she needed it or not. But her daughter-in-law's opinion mattered more than anything else. Atisha couldn't believe the invitation was for the Heinz family. It says that the invitation is for Sister Larienne, Viscount Heinz, and Lady Dorothea. Are they really all coming north? The girl put the envelope back on the table. The lady replied that it looked as if an invitation was not needed. She apologized and said she should have asked her. Atisha replied that she knew and was grateful that she asked. Cyrillez called her maid over and told her to throw the letter away. Then, after thinking for a moment, she told her to tear it up and burn it. Then melt the remaining ashes in water and turn it into ice. Then chop the ice with an axe. The maid replied that she would do it right away. She turned to Atisha and asked her if she should pour oil on the broken ice and set it on fire again. The girl responded by asking if she could receive this invitation if everything was okay. Cyrilez thought she'd gone too far. Atisha replied that she wanted to break it herself. At the Marquise of Hexion's residence, a man asked the canary if she was ready. The girl came out to him in a beautiful red dress and a mask on her face. She asked him if she had to wear this dress because she wanted to choose other clothes. The Marquise replied that last time she was happy because the dress was gorgeous and asked if that was true. Judith replied that she hated him now. The man replied that she couldn't do that right now. This is a great opportunity for her to appear in Madame Monmad's gift. People without power, like her, must use everything available to them. She needs to be patient. If all goes well, she'll be able to buy dresses just like this one. Dith replied that she understood. She thought that the Marquise was right. From now on, she would climb up on her own 2 feet. The girl entered the main hall. Men and women immediately noticed her. Judith decided that from today on, she would be Cayenne's mistress. She came to this celebration as his courtesan. At the ball, the guests danced and had fun. Men invited women to dance. Others were gossiping over a glass of champagne, but their peace was disturbed by a girl who had just entered the room. The stranger with the mask was dressed smartly, and immediately all eyes were on her. Judith thought everything was going well. She should play with confidence, and all that remains for her to do is wait until my mother tells her the way. Suddenly, the waiter who was carrying the glasses collided with Judith. The glasses of freshly poured champagne crashed to the floor. The waiter apologized and asked if she was okay. Judith took off her mask, smiled, and said that she was fine. The guests couldn't believe it was Judith under the mask. How could a commoner come to this party? Marquis Hexion let someone into the party without verifying their identity? The guests thought that the commoner was at the ball because someone had taken her along. Perhaps Duke Cayenne took her with him as his mistress? If this is so, then this woman must be Duke Cayenne's mistress. Val de Prame told the Duke that he seemed to have found him. Indeed, he was still alive. Duke Cayenne replied that, of course, he was not one to die easily. The assistant felt like someone was helping him every time he missed it. He thinks there might be an insider. Cayenne of Wintle replied that he knew about it. The aide asked again. The Duke said it was true, but they had nothing to worry about, so Val de Prame had better continue to keep an eye on him. This time he needs to be more careful and not get caught again. Val de Prame replied that he would do so, and left Cayenne's office. The man paused in the corridor and thought. He wondered what the Duke was counting on in his head. He doesn't understand it at all. These days, he values only the vase Lady Atisha gave him. The atmosphere is also different from what it was before. Suddenly, his assistant realized. The Duke pressed the blue ball. Once again, Atisha congratulated him on his birthday and wished him a good year. Val de Prame couldn't believe such a thing was possible. He thought that if the Duke really was like that, he would change his dog. The next day, Judith hummed a cheerful tune and looked at the huge mountain of gifts. She thought that, as expected, Marquis Hexion was right. Everyone at the party thinks she is Cayenne's lover, so they sent her these gifts. If she wears this in front of others, will it mean she is Cayenne's lover? Someone knocked on the door and asked if she was there. It was Mrs. Cyrilez. The girl was a little scared, because she wasn't expecting it. She didn't know what to do with all those gifts on the table. Cyrilez said she had something to say, and was just coming in for a minute. Judith started hiding the gifts, and asked me to wait a second. Suddenly, the doors opened. The girl thought that if Madame Cyrilez saw this, Judith sat down and, overcoming herself, looked at her mother. It seemed that Madame was furious. The woman said that she had heard that she and Marquis Hexion had a fairly good relationship. She asked the girl if it was true that she had invited him to her tower and had also gone out with him. Dith remained silent. The Marquis told her that he avoided all the guards. So how did she know? Mrs. Cyrilez took her daughter's hands in hers and said that she understood her. She is already of age to be married. It is time to look for a man. Cyrilez can't pay attention to them because of Cayenne's marriage. The woman said that Dith's problem was due to her ignorance, but she hoped that she would have a happy marriage with a rich and wonderful man. She's not a nobleman's concubine. She'll provide any support, and they'll negotiate for any man she wants. Judith didn't expect Miss Cyrilez to say anything like that. She expected to be scolded. But the woman, on the contrary, cares about her very much. Mom wants her to be happy. Maybe she'll let her be with Cayenne. The girl said she wanted to tell her something. Madam, she's listening carefully. Judith said that she really loves Cayenne. The girl confessed that she would like to become Cayenne's concubine. Then, she will not be separated from her mistress. and will live happily in the castle for a long time." Cyriles stood up abruptly and slapped the girl across the face. Judith screamed. The woman couldn't comprehend what she had done. She said it was impossible. The two of them, never. "The two of them can't be like that." The woman turned the table over, picked up Judith, and started shaking her. Judith begged to be released and allowed to go, to which Madame shouted at her to swear that she would never look at Cayenne as a man again. Judith just cried and couldn't say anything else, so the lady shouted at her to hurry up. Suddenly, Miss Kirillazzi realized what she was doing and let the girl go. She fell to the floor and hit herself hard. Regret was evident in Madame's eyes. The woman leaned over, apologized, and tried to touch Judith, but she moved away from her. The girl turned away and said that she wanted to be alone now. Cyriles realized that it was better for her to put it alone, and therefore decided to leave. Finally, she told her that she would send a doctor here to examine her, and if she had any injuries, then let her know. The action takes place on a bright spring day. The Spring Festival in the Ignaban Empire has begun, and people have begun celebrating it, Atisha asked again. The Duke explained that Madame Monmad had sent her an invitation to the Spring Festival. The girl was surprised that in the north, even without spring, there is still a Spring Festival. She asked if they would catch a cold because the event was being held outdoors. Cayenne told her that although it was called the Spring Festival, it was an indoor party. Madame Monmad was just setting the festive mood. He asked if she wanted to take part. Atisha L. thought she'd been up north for a while, so it must be a good idea to attend events like this now. She replied that if the Duke joined her, she would be happy to go. The man replied that she should consider herself going. The lady asked if they were all right. Maybe he was busy and she was wasting his time? The Duke replied no. Before the marriage, he would accompany Lady Atisha to certain places. He thought that of course he didn't have time to attend parties like this right now, but if it was only for a while. Atisha thanked him for agreeing. She said that in this case, she could try wearing the clothes the Duke had given her. Cayenne thought that he was indeed very busy, but he could adjust his schedule. After all, when Atisha dies, even if there are private parties, he will never go to them again. Atisha talked about her thoughts on what dress to wear. All the dresses the Duke gave her were very beautiful. He asked what she was talking about. Since this party was dedicated to the Spring Festival, she should wear a new, appropriate dress. The lady replied that she still had many dresses in her closet that she had not worn. Cayenne said he would then throw a party where she could wear those dresses. That's normal for Lady Atisha. The man added that it would be good to hold the festival on the Wintle premises. She can wear a matching dress on different days or choose a party theme for the entire week. Atisha laughed. She'd tried to refuse the dress, but it seemed she'd gotten another gift, a party. At the Spring Festival itself, guests were already gradually gathering. Madame Monmad asked Judith if she had memorized the text. The girl replied that she had memorized everything without any mistakes. Madame said that again, the Spring Festival is the song of the opening of spring, and the person who sings this song is the main character of the festival. Judith asked her to do it to you. She rehearsed for several nights to remember it. The girl was confident. Monmad thought about Baroness Atisha attending a party today. Duke Cayenne had said he would accompany her, but that was probably just a formality. The Duke is known for not showing up at such events. She decided to show them all today. The label of the main wife, who is worse than a concubine, will remain with her for the rest of her life. She must make Judith a useful tool. The woman took her scarf and covered the girl's shoulders. The lady said her shoulders were too revealing. This clothing was affecting her dignity, so it was best to refrain from such behavior. Didn't Madame Cyriles tell her about this? Dith looked down and apologized. Monmad noticed her expression change when she thought about Madame Cyriles. Should she try to persuade her to talk? The woman replied that everything was fine. Madame Cyriles is known for her cruelty. Anyone who stays close to her will definitely get hurt. She did nothing wrong. When Mrs. Cyriles causes her trouble, she can turn to her. Judith wiped a tear from her cheek. The girl said that she thought that the lady was taking care of her, but it turns out that this is not the case. She asked Monmad what she should do. Her throat was dry from crying. Madame suggested pretending she didn't know this and leaving it for today. But if there is something to tell about Cyriles, then let her find it and add that this scarf is a gift. She offered to listen to a great song today. She'd be waiting. Judith silently told Monmad that she really was a good person. Madame was walking down the stairs, and she was wondering who had come there, but suddenly she grimaced because she saw Miss Atisha together with Duke Cayenne. The Duke, who is almost never seen at parties, appears as a partner. Moreover, is this necklace really an angel's heart? Monmad thought that was actually a good thing. Today, the girl will lose her face right in front of Duke Cayenne. Madame Monmad thanked everyone for coming to her party today. She asked if it was true that to start the spring festival, of course there had to be a spring opening song. The woman waved her fan and asked Judith's permission to introduce her. She introduced Judith as the person who would sing the song that would usher in spring. Atisha was very surprised to see Dith standing in front of her. The guests began whispering about them. They said that, seeing Madame Monmad in such a state, they were convinced that Judith was indeed the Duke of Cayenne's beloved. This must be true. Monmad continued to say that before the song began, the spring festival was still an unfamiliar event for them, the Northerners. She said that Miss Dith, who will perform the song, is also from the North. This song about the opening of spring might mean too much to her. If only someone could help Miss Judith. Suddenly, she looked at Baroness Atisha and asked if she wanted to sing with Dith. The guests began to beg her to sing. They wanted to hear a song from the capital that would usher in spring. Monmad grinned. The first wife and mistress stand back to back as they sing. Everyone will compare the two of them. Besides, from what she's heard, Baroness Atisha in the capital is terribly deaf. This would be truly embarrassing. Right now, the Duke asked Madame Monmad what she was doing. He can't believe she's making such a rude request after inviting a guest. The Countess replied that it could be very wonderful and that what he said was a bit of an exaggeration. She just wants to leave the Baroness the honor of singing the song that opens spring. Cayenne asked again if she was really talking about honor now. He asked her to explain the purpose then. She's putting Dith, a commoner, in this glorious place. Monmad said she received an anonymous recommendation. They said that her singing skills came to her in the same way as a canary. The man said she intended to take advantage of Diths. Those who know nothing are trying to slander Miss Atisha. The same applies to those who support the Countess. The Duke said that from start to finish, he suspects their intentions behind this situation. Atisha L. took his hand and said that she thought everything would be okay if she sang. He began to warn her that this was a strange situation, but the Baroness replied that she did not want the festive atmosphere to be spoiled because of her. The girl touched the pendant and added that she also wanted to sing. Cayenne of Wintle replied that if everything was good for her, then let her go. Atisha approached the Countess and asked if she could sing there now. The woman was at a loss. Atisha replied that she meant a song to usher in spring. Such an opportunity is rare, so she wants to sing it. She asked if she would sing with Dith. Would she like to sing the first verse? If she picks up the tempo, she can sing along. Judith replied that she would then sing the first verse. The two girls stood together, preparing for their performance. Dith thought about how she had to show everyone that she, not Atisha, was the right person for Cayenne. Judith began singing the first verse. Her voice was beautiful, and the guests enjoyed her singing. Monmad thought that although her plan was a little different, it seemed like she would succeed in the end. Atisha would soon be embarrassed in front of all these people. The girl began to sing. Unexpectedly for Madame Monmad, the Baroness had a beautiful voice, which the guests had already appreciated. She thought it was all nonsense. She could clearly hear that the Baroness was deaf. Judith also couldn't understand how Atisha could have such a voice. The girl remembered that she used to love singing, but she couldn't boast about it because her sister Larienne was deaf. It all remained just a dream. When she finished, she heard applause. People shouted their admiration for her. They couldn't believe she'd been hiding this talent all along. That evening, she and the Duke were preparing to return home in a carriage. Atisha thanked him for agreeing to return. He replied that he himself needed to return to the castle and asked if she was tired. The girl replied that no, and added that she wanted to sing more. Atisha wants to sing her heart out in an open space, like a castle, without any breaks. The Duke tapped on the window to get the carriage moving and told the girl that he would take her to a place where she could sing with all her heart. Sometime later, they were still driving. They were passing through a snowy forest. At last they arrived. The Duke opened the door and stepped out of the carriage first. Atisha followed him too. The man offered her his hand and invited her to go with him. The girl froze. She saw the beauty that awaited her on the other side of the road. Atisha asked Cayenne what this place was, and he replied that he lived here when he was little. He reminded her that she had said she wanted to sing freely, without interference. There was no one in this place. The Baroness smiled, looked at the Duke, and realized that this was his secret place. The man said that he would always help her and invited her in. When they entered, the girl was delighted by both the simplicity and luxury of the place. She kept repeating how beautiful it was here. The Duke said she knew it was quite small. He added that if she felt uncomfortable here, she could return back to Wintle Castle. Atisha L. countered and said that she really liked the place. She was just surprised for a while, and so she didn't know what to say. Although she doesn't know whether it's strange for him to hear this or not, but for some reason, she feels very comfortable and cozy in this place. The girl began to open the window. When she opened it and looked at the view, she finally declared that she really liked it. Duke, I said that when he was young, he often trained with a sword alone in the forest. When she mentioned a place without any obstacles, this house was the first thing that came to his mind. It was a place he had even forgotten about for a while, but when he listened to her sing today, he suddenly remembered. The girl was embarrassed because he said that he remembered the place precisely because he listened to her sing. The Duke continued, "Fortunately, she likes it here. She can come and use the house any time." The girl thought about how it now felt like an abandoned house, and she really wanted to sing in it. She began to sing, and her voice began to spread throughout the house. Atisha was a little embarrassed and overjoyed to be able to sing again. Cayenne of Wintel listened attentively. Meanwhile, at the Hines estate, Larianne became hysterical. She smashed a cup and screamed. She told her to believe in her. She knows how to do it herself, so why can't she see Atisha yet? Madame Dorothea was taken aback by her daughter's sudden change of mood and sudden question. Larianne fell to the floor, clutching her head and screaming Atisha's name. A beloved and sweet doll who lives and exists for herself. A doll you'll never get tired of. Atisha has been in the north for 2 weeks, but she still cannot contact her. Mom asked Laurie first of all to just calm down and talk calmly. She tried to touch her daughter, but her daughter slapped her hand. The girl screamed that Tisha was hers alone and should be on her side. Mom thought that after she consoled her for a while, she would be fine. This was a big problem for her. The situation was becoming increasingly unsettled. Larianne said that today, in the upper class, everyone is excited because they received an invitation from the Duke of Wintel. She added that it was true. She needed to come too. Come to Tisha's wedding. Dorothea started to stop her, but her daughter replied that it was all in vain. If she locks her in the room again this time, she will bite her tongue and commit suicide. Madame screamed about what it was saying. Did she really want her mother's heart to break? Larianne opened the door and walked out of the hall, her mother's screams behind her. In her room, she thought about how she could get north to meet Tisha. Then she'll take her back to the Hines estate. But what if it all fails? If so, then she too will leave her family and live in the north with Tisha. The next day, the maid was doing Atisha's hair and said it seemed the Duke had left early. She added that the wedding was approaching, and it would be nice if he spent more time with her. Atisha said not to say such a thing, because the Duke went to a party with her yesterday and took her to his house. Marin said she still wished the Duke cared about her more than that. This is the north. She had to leave the capital and come here. The only person she can rely on is the Duke. The girl wanted to add something else, but unexpectedly, Atisha snatched the comb from her hands. She stood up and sat the maid down on a chair. Marin didn't understand what was happening. The Baroness thanked her, but added that what she had said was wrong. The Duke isn't the only person she can rely on. She has hers, too. The maid couldn't believe it. The girl added that Marine meant a lot to her. She also has Marin's mother. She also takes good care of her. And she has it herself. As it turns out, it has become a great support for herself. Until now, Atisha always wanted to understand the Duke, to know more about him. But as it turned out, she didn't know that first she had to understand herself. Someone knocked on the door, and Corda, the head maid, said it was her. Atisha asked what was wrong, and the maid came in. The woman said that they needed to go to the snow castle because the great lady was waiting for her. When they approached the snow castle, Atisha was shocked by its size. She was delighted to think that the former Duke and Duchess of Wintels had lived here. When they entered, the girl thought that it was just as beautiful inside. It has an old-fashioned charm. Corda said she opened the door for them. Mrs. Cyrillez was waiting for her in the hall. The woman greeted her daughter-in-law and asked her to come over. Atisha L. walked up to her and looked in the direction her mother-in-law was looking. In the cabinet behind the glass stood 2 mannequins, dressed in the wedding clothes of the Duke and Duchess. Cyrillez said the wedding was only 2 weeks away. Now that the preparations were complete, she needed to try it on. The maids took her by the arms and led her to another room to change her clothes. When Atisha stepped out in her outfit, no one could remain indifferent. She looked stunning. The lady asked Corda if it was really nice to get ready quickly. The maid replied that it was. The dress looked like it was made at Atisha. Cyrillez approached the girl and said that she was glad to see the Wintel family heirloom, which had been passed down through many generations, shining so brightly. Atisha thought about it and asked herself if she could wear such a precious dress. She told the lady that if it was a family heirloom, she was sure that every Duchess of Wintels had worn that wedding dress at her wedding. Ms. Kirlis said there was an exception, and it was her. She didn't wear this wedding dress to her wedding. Her husband didn't wear one either. The woman said something strange happened. No one knows what will happen next. She told her that Atisha shouldn't worry about such trifles either. The girl turned around and looked in the mirror, thinking about what her mother-in-law had said. Was she really just overthinking it? She didn't need to take this issue seriously. The girl thought that this was right. It was better to think to herself for now. Like when she sang, for example. Indeed, she needed to think about that. She looked at the suit and wondered when she would be able to meet the Duke's father. Meanwhile, Larianne Hines ran through the deserted streets of the city. The only thought in her head was that in the end, she would meet Atisha. Suddenly, she collided with some guy and hit herself very painfully. She shouted at him that he was insane. How could he hurt a noblewoman's precious body? The girl added that he should open his eyes when he walked and ran away. The man didn't answer her and only looked sternly after the stranger. When Larianne ran to the portal that would send her north, she gave a bag of coins to the servant for the work done. Suddenly, she overheard an important conversation. Someone told Carls it was time to leave. He asked if it was time already, and a little later agreed that they needed to return to Wintel. Larianne knew that name, Carls Wintel. He was the Duke of Cayenne's father. Larianne didn't show at first that she knew him and simply stood there watching. She wondered if they followed him, would they be able to easily contact the Wintel family? It was impossible. Why should she follow him secretly? The girl took off her coat and told herself that she was Larianne Hines. She didn't need to be so pathetic. Larianne approached the man and said it was rude. He turned around. The girl said she was Larianne Hines of the Hines family Viscounty. She is also the older sister of Atisha's, who will soon become the Duchess of Wintel. The man turned around and, without saying a word, walked away in the other direction. Larianne didn't understand what it was at all. Why did he look down on others? He's already black and as tall as a pole. The girl thought about it. She remembered how she had recently run into a man while running to the teleporter. The man she had met in the alley earlier looked like a pillar. Could this man be the previous Duke of Carls? Does that mean he ignored her? Like the previous Duke, he did it on purpose. Larianne approached him again and said she regretted what happened in the alley earlier. The girl added that she was in a hurry at the time, which is why it happened that way. Carls Wintel replied that he'd never been to such a place. Larianne was surprised and said it only became clear to her now. The man replied that their faces were simply identical. That was the whole secret. Larianne said that since they met, it was fate, and asked if she could go north with him. I also have nowhere to stay in Wintel until the wedding day. Carls Wintel replied that she could stay at Chateau Wintel until the wedding day. He invited her to join his guests. Larianne couldn't believe it was so simple. Just a minute ago, he'd been ignoring her. The girl looked into his eyes and noticed that the previous Duke's eyes were sky blue, and the man she ran into in the alley had black ones. So it was someone else. She stood there for a moment, thinking about it. She became curious why that man was pretending to be one person. The next day, Atisha went out into the courtyard to meet Duke Cayenne. The carriage arrived, and a man stepped out. Atisha was once again captivated by his beauty. The girl approached him and said that she was glad he had returned. Today, he had returned earlier than usual. Cayenne was surprised and asked if Atisha had been waiting for him all this time. She blushed and said that wasn't true. Today, she would enjoy tea with her mother. The man said that he was going to go to a snow castle. Atisha said she was in this snow castle yesterday too, and it was truly amazing. She even wore a wedding dress. Atisha couldn't understand why the Duke looked more tired today, a little gloomy. The girl asked if from now on, she could meet him every time he came. The Duke didn't quite understand her, so he asked her again if she really wanted to come and pick him up. The Baroness blushed deeply and asked herself what she was saying. The girl replied that nothing happened and that she had said something bad. She asked him to forget about it. Atisha asked him to think about it. If she simply waited outside, the Duke might feel uncomfortable. Besides her, there were also the castle's maids who came out to greet the Duke. Many maids. Miss apologized and said that this was not what they had originally agreed on. The man leaned over and told her not to say that. He didn't like it at all. He hopes Lady Atisha doesn't say such things. A tea party, a party, or a festival. Whatever she wants, no problem. The Duke added that she should simply use the remaining time as she wished. The girl wondered if Cayenne had really been like this from the start. It seemed like something else. She doesn't know exactly what it is. The girl asked if the offer meant she could live as she wanted in Wintel Castle. The man replied that was true. She asked whether he should even enjoy tea with his mother, or wait for the Duke. The Duke replied that it was correct, and if she wanted anything else, she should just tell him. Atisha thought about what she wanted now. and realized that she knew what she wanted. The Baroness asked the man if he could go with her and offered him her hand. She offered to go with her to the snow castle and enjoy tea with her mother. Meanwhile, at the castle, Madame Cyrillaise was having tea with Judith. The woman apologized for calling her here so suddenly. She wants to apologize directly to her for what happened last time. Judith looked down and said that she should have been the one apologizing. Because she wants to become Cayenne's concubine, she has become so unbalanced. The girl started to cry, so the lady quickly moved to the sofa next to her. She told her that everything was fine, and she was with her. She could fulfill other requests. She wanted anything or anyone. Judith said that Madame Momad told her that even if she was born a commoner, there was a way out. If she is approved by His Majesty and accepted into a noble family, she can receive noble status. The girl cried and said that if the lady really loved her as a daughter, then please let her accept her into the official Wintle family. If this is so, could she really be the daughter of the Grand Duchess? Judith said that if she did this, the girl would never think about Cayenne again. The girls sat in silence for a while, and then Judith said that the lady had said that she cared about her. Cyrillaise said that if she could, she would also like to give her noble status, but it was beyond her capabilities. She couldn't tell her why. Judith immediately thought she was lying. But the words the lady said showed that she was really worried about her. She remembered her words about how dear she was to her. The girl thought it was all a lie. Voices in her head told her she mustn't be deceived again. The noble Duchess Wintel wouldn't consider someone as lowly as her true daughter. She is just an imperial canary, a particularly favorite pet bird. Judith suddenly calmed down and said that everything was fine, and she was just saying it. The girl apologized for saying something like that so suddenly. She thanked her for the gift, asked for forgiveness, and was about to leave the hall. But when she opened the door, she saw Cayenne in front of her along with Atisha. Mrs. Cyrillaise apologized and said that they should go back today. They would meet tomorrow. Atisha smiled and said they would return tomorrow then. But suddenly, Dith grabbed the Duke's hand and begged them not to leave. She begged them with pleading eyes to stay with her, especially Cayenne. Atisha looked at Judith in horror and couldn't understand what had just happened. The Duke took his hand back and suggested they have tea together, the four of them. Judith immediately became cheerful, as if she hadn't just been crying. As the four of them sat and drank tea, Atisha couldn't help but wonder what had happened. She didn't like the Duchess's expression, and it seemed very gloomy. What was the Duke thinking when he suggested that they all have tea together? Judith turned to Cayenne and said it reminded her of the old days. There were only 2 children in this castle, so they always played together. She looked up and asked if he remembered this little hut built in a tree. The girl said that when he was young, Cayenne often went to this hut alone. In fact, she wants to go with Cayenne too. He asked if she wanted to talk about the house he had visited with Miss Atisha recently. The man added that Miss Atisha will now use this house often, so she can sing comfortably. Cyrillaise told her daughter-in-law that she heard the news that she sang a song dedicated to the opening of spring. Atisha smiled and said that there were a lot of compliments, and she hopes that the lady will also sing for her someday. Cyrillaise replied that she was already looking forward to hearing the song performed by her daughter-in-law. The Duke raised his cup of tea and asked his mother if she knew that Dith had also been invited to this party. The Duchess replied that she knew that side of the story. Cayenne said he would then briefly recount it. The man explained that he had negotiated some deals with the family of Count Monmad. Cyrillaise said that was a reasonable response. Judith couldn't contain herself and cried out, asking what was going on. Was he really breaking the deal with Count Monmad? Countess Monmad had done nothing wrong. She sang because she wanted to sing. Cayenne replied that if she continued to be near Countess Monmad, Wintel would no longer be able to protect her. So let her wake up right now. There's still time to talk about this. The girl banged the table and said that Madame Monmad was a good person. Judith spilled tea on the floor and decided that she would just leave. Cyrillaise shouted at her not to leave. Atisha jumped up and said she would follow her. The Baroness ran out into the street and started calling Dith. She saw her not far from the castle. The girl sat, hugging her knees sadly. Atisha approached her. She asked her if she could stand and said that if she ran so fast, she might fall. Atisha extended her hand, but Judith slapped it back. The girl screamed. Judith, without looking up, asked her who she was to call Madame Mom. The mistress is the mistress. That's why she calls her that. So why did she call her that? Judith grabbed her, and Atisha started screaming for her to calm down. She was too excited now. Dith continued to scream why she was not in her place, and suddenly, the girl took the ring off Atisha's hand. She picked up a large stone from the ground and smiled. Etisha asked her not to do this. Judith just looked at the ring with a crazy look and laughed. She stood for a while, thinking whether to do it or not. Etisha asked to give her the ring. Judith looked into her eyes and smiled broadly. She swung the stone at the ring. Etisha was at a loss and just screamed, asking what she was doing. Dith said that if she couldn't have this ring, she would destroy it. The Baroness grabbed her hand and told her to stop right now. Judith screamed at her to move away from her and then ran in the other direction. Etisha thought that she didn't seem ready to stop. Why was she so excited? Someone behind her asked if this was complete madness. The girl knew that voice. She turned and saw her sister Lariane. The girl was approaching her. Etisha asked why she was there, but Lariane's gaze was fixed on Judith. Dith asked who she was. Lariane grabbed her by the dress and started shaking her. She asked her how she dared touch her sister. Dith was a little scared. Etisha looked at this with horror and wondered why her sister was here. Lariane grabbed the girl by the hair and started screaming that Etisha had told her to stop. Her sister had told her to stop. Etisha rushed towards them and began to beg and plead with her sister to stop. Lariane asked Dith if she thought she was the only one in the world who could go crazy. She began to pull the girl's hair even harder, causing her to wince in pain. Lariane asked what she should do if she was even crazier than Judith. In a fit of anger, the girl accidentally hit Etisha in the chest with her elbow. She screamed. Someone grabbed her shoulder from behind and pulled her close. It turned out to be the Duke. He'd heard the screams and come. Etisha was glad it was him. The man asked if she was okay. The Baroness smiled at him because he was there. Cayenne said he was worried, which was why he came. He looked towards Lariane and Judith and asked what was going on. Duke Cayenne approached and told Lady Hines to stop immediately. The girl froze at first, then released Judith. Etisha intervened in the conversation. She asked to wait a little because she wanted to have a private conversation with her sister. Val de Prame told the Duke that when Lady Hines was traveling north, she had met the former Duke by chance and had ended up accompanying him. Cayenne replied that his father wasn't the kind of man who could easily support anyone. Why did he go with Hines? With Lariane Hines. The man thought, how dare she come to this place? If she continues to intimidate Etisha, he will not stop at exiling her. The girls sat in silence. Lariane looked at Etisha and smiled. Etisha L. asked her sister how she got there. Lariane replied that she met Sir Carls on the way. The girl couldn't believe what she heard. Her sister said it was true. She will remain at Wintle Castle until the wedding. She was officially invited as a guest of the former Duke. Etisha reflected on the fact that Judith had received an invitation from Sir Carls. She told her sister that her parents would be worried, so why wouldn't she come back? Lariane screamed no. Etisha thought that, as expected, Lariane seemed to have no intention of returning. The sister smiled and said that she missed Etisha very much and missed conversations like this. The Baroness replied that she hadn't missed her. Lariane asked what she was saying. Etisha should be polite to her. Etisha told her sister that she wanted her to stop and go back to the capital. The girl started screaming, asking who told her about this, and then added that she understood everything. It was Cayenne who had imprisoned her and brainwashed her. Lariane said he was brainwashing her into breaking up with her sister. She stood up and started screaming for Etisha to wake up. There was no reason for such a great man as the Duke to actually marry her. She was dreaming right now. Etisha asked her not to scream. Hines asked if this Duke had really taken Tisha away from her. The Baroness told her sister that she didn't belong there. Since she would become the Duchess of Wintel, she intended to live a life that had nothing to do with the Hines family. Lariane asked if she really wanted to marry Duke Cayenne. Was this guy more important to her than her sister? Etisha replied that of course she liked Duke Cayenne more than she did. She really does like him. Her sister screamed that she absolutely doesn't. Cayenne definitely doesn't love her. He would harm her and abandon her at any time. Etisha replied that the Duke was not like that. Lariane angrily said that since Tisha was doing this, she had no other choice. The girl said she would tell everyone about Etisha's illness. All of it. In the evening, Etisha stood in her room near the window and looked at the starry sky. She wondered what if Lariane was right when she said she had too much magical power. Someone called her from behind. It was the Duke. Etisha was glad to see him. Cayenne offered her his hand, and when the girl touched it in response, he pulled her towards him. The lady was confused. The man walked to the window and closed it, saying that there was a sudden strong wind in the north, so she should be careful. The Duke noticed that Etisha looked worried and asked if what had happened was the reason for her mood today. Etisha swallowed and told the Duke that she had something to tell him. She said her sister beat Dith because Dith tried to break her wedding ring. The girl tried to hide the bruise on her arm from Dith. The Duke noticed. He apologized for being rude. Atisha didn't understand what he meant. The man said her hand didn't look very good. He sees his hand turning red. Kayan adds that it needs treatment. Atisha, I told him that her sister said she would reveal the truth about her excessive magical power. She asked him what she should do. The man replied that if that were the case, even expelling Larian Hines would be dangerous. If everyone learned the truth about the deadline, the wedding would have to be called off. Atisha thought that Cyrillaise would probably also be against it because she wanted the Duke to have a life partner. She asked what she should do now. The man leaned over and took her hand. He put the ring back on her finger. Atisha had even forgotten about it because of her sister. The Duke asked Atisha to marry him. She asked what it meant to marry. Hadn't they already decided to do so? The man replied that they would now go to the Wintle Castle Cathedral and hold the wedding there. Once a marriage is established, it cannot be changed. The Duke said it did not matter what happened after Lady Atisha became his wife. First, he needs to treat Atisha's hand. The girl said she was fine, but after she waved her hand, she cried out in pain. The man said Atisha needed to take better care of herself. He pulled out some hydrogen peroxide and bandages from the nightstand. The Duke bandaged her hand and thought that he did not know when he began to care about the health and safety of Lady Atisha's. He just hopes that she is not sick or injured and can live peacefully. Atisha thanked him for his concern for her. She says everything is fine because she's getting into the habit of saying that. Atisha L. added that Duke Kayan is indeed a very good man. The Duke replied that he would try to become someone who would only be good in Atisha's memories. There are many enemies around him, and they're quite dangerous. More specifically, on the battlefield, there's no time to judge one's worth. He became a good man only because he wanted the lady to have a good influence on him. Kayan asked if he had tied the bandage too tightly. The girl replied that everything was fine and suggested he go to the cathedral now. As they stood in the cathedral, Atisha thought about how in the Empire, it doesn't matter whether you're married or not. Only by fulfilling the marriage vows of husband and wife can they be recognized as husband and wife. With this vow, she and the Duke would officially become husband and wife. She also thought about how she would soon become Atisha Wintel. Duke Kayan told her that if she didn't like it, they could stop it. Atisha replied that wasn't true. She asked if it was true that he didn't see any problem. Did he really want this wedding? Kayan replied that he really wanted to marry her. Atisha replied that she wanted that too. The man said that with the blessing of his father and mother, he, Kayan Wintel, agrees to marry Atisha L., and he vows to remain faithful and honest as husband and wife. Afterwards, Atisha said that with the blessing of her father and mother, she, Atisha L., agreed to marry Kayan Wintel and would be sure to maintain the trust and integrity of husband and wife. The man said that now they should kiss each other to exchange vows. Atisha blushed. The Duke pulled her head towards him. The girl wondered if he'd missed other procedures. So why not just leave the kiss? Before Atisha could say anything, the Duke kissed her tenderly.